The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across the neatly trimmed hedges surrounding St. Mary's Orphanage in Surrey. The air carried the crispness of autumn, with leaves crunching underfoot and the faint scent of burning wood from nearby chimneys. Charles Whitmore stepped out of his sleek black Bentley, adjusting the cufflinks on his tailored navy suit. At 68, he was still the picture of dignity and affluence, his silver hair combed neatly back, his posture upright. Yet there was a heaviness to his movements, a kind of weariness that no amount of wealth could disguise. As he walked up the cobblestone path toward the arched wooden doors, he paused to take in the cheerful laughter of children playing in the garden. It was a sound that stirred something deep within him, though he wouldn't have admitted it even to himself. The headmistress, a stout woman with kind eyes named Mrs. Cartwright, greeted him warmly at the entrance. "Mr. Whitmore, it's always such a pleasure to see you," she said, extending a hand. "Your generosity has meant the world to us." Charles nodded politely and handed her an envelope, its weight belying the large donation within. He had visited the orphanage before, always ensuring his contributions were sizable enough to maintain the facilities and provide for the children. But his visits were brief, impersonal, a duty performed more out of habit than heartfelt commitment. Today, however, was different. As Mrs. Cartwright began to thank him, his attention was drawn to a small figure in the corner of the room. A little girl, no older than 6, sat on a worn armchair clutching a threadbare teddy bear. Her hair was dark and unruly, her cheeks pale, but it was her eyes that arrested him. Wide and searching, they seemed to hold a depth of sorrow and resilience far beyond her years. She stared at him unabashedly, as if trying to read his soul. For a moment, Charles felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Those eyes, they were unmistakable. He had seen them before, in another life, in another face. "Mr. Whitmore." Mrs. Cartwright's voice jolted him back to the present. She followed his gaze and smiled softly. "That's Anna. She's been with us for a few months now." Charles swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie. "I see," he said, his voice tight. He tried to dismiss the thought forming in his mind, but it clung stubbornly. Those eyes were Eleanor's. His late wife, gone for over 15 years, had looked at him with that same soulful gaze. "Would you like to meet her?" Mrs. Cartwright asked gently. "No," he said quickly, then caught himself. "I mean, not today. Another time, perhaps." Mrs. Cartwright nodded understandingly, but Charles could feel Anna's gaze following him as he turned to leave. The sensation stayed with him, lingering even as he stepped back into the crisp autumn air and climbed into his car. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring straight ahead as the engine purred to life. The warmth of the sun, the beauty of the day, all of it felt distant now. Driving back to his estate, Charles couldn't shake the image of Anna's face. It wasn't just the resemblance to Eleanor that haunted him. There was something else, a vulnerability, a silent plea that struck a chord he hadn't realized was still capable of vibrating. For years, his life had been defined by routine and solitude. He had poured his energy into his business empire, building an impenetrable fortress of wealth and influence. But the emptiness of his sprawling estate, the absence of laughter and companionship, was a void he had learned to accept as permanent. As the gates to Whitmore Manor swung open, Charles felt an ache in his chest he couldn't quite explain. Parking the car, he walked into the grand foyer, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors. He glanced up at the portrait of Eleanor that hung above the fireplace. She had been painted in her prime, her auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, her smile radiant. How many nights had he sat before that painting, a glass of whiskey in hand, trying to recall the sound of her voice? Tonight, he did not linger. Instead, he climbed the sweeping staircase to his study, a space cluttered with ledgers, antique maps, and faded photographs. He sank into the leather armchair by the window and closed his eyes, but the image of Anna refused to leave him. Her wide, searching eyes, the way she had clutched that teddy bear as though it were her only anchor in a storm. Charles sighed heavily and rubbed his temples. "What is happening to me?" he murmured aloud. He was not a man given to sentimentality or flights of fancy, yet something about that encounter had stirred a long-buried part of him, a part that once dreamed of a family with Eleanor, a dream that had died with her. For the first time in years, Charles felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, not sadness exactly, nor joy. It was more akin to a yearning, a pull towards something he couldn't quite define. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, he found himself wondering if his life, so meticulously constructed, was missing something he had long convinced himself he didn't need. As the evening settled over Whitmore Manor, a soft glow from the antique sconces illuminated the rich tapestries and dark mahogany furniture of the sitting room. Charles Whitmore, still dressed in his suit, sat motionless in his high-backed armchair. His hands rested on the carved wooden arms, his fingers absently tracing the patterns. Before him stood a fireplace, the kindling crackling faintly, its warmth doing little to thaw the chill that had settled in his chest. Above the mantel, Eleanor's portrait gazed serenely down at him, her auburn hair falling in soft waves, her smile imbued with a quiet strength. For years, that smile had been his comfort, his beacon in moments of doubt. Yet tonight, it seemed to mock him, as if asking why he remained frozen in the same routines, clinging to a life that had long ceased to hold meaning. It had been 15 years since Eleanor passed. He could still remember every detail of that day, the sterile hospital room, the steady beep of the monitors, the doctor's solemn tone. Her illness had been swift and unforgiving, leaving him no time to prepare. He had thrown himself into work afterward, expanding his business empire, traveling to distant cities, immersing himself in acquisitions and mergers. But the vast fortune he had amassed brought no solace. Each achievement felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. Their shared dream of a family had always been a tender subject. In their early years of marriage, they spoke often of children, a boy, perhaps, who would inherit Charles's love of history, or a girl who might have Eleanor's artistic flair. But the years slipped by, and for reasons neither could fully explain, that dream went unfulfilled. Eleanor had always reassured him, saying their love was enough, that they had each other, and for a time it had been true. But now, without her, the emptiness seemed insurmountable. The sprawling manor, once a place of warmth and laughter, had become a mausoleum of memories. He spent countless nights in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey, staring at her photographs. Her favorite shawl still hung over the back of a chair in their bedroom, her perfume lingering faintly in the fabric. He couldn't bring himself to remove it, as though doing so would erase the last traces of her presence. Tonight, however, it wasn't just Eleanor's absence that weighed on him. It was Anna. The little girl's face had imprinted itself in his mind. Those wide, searching eyes, so like Eleanor's, had stirred something in him he couldn't quite name. He tried to dismiss it as coincidence, a trick of the mind, but the image persisted, growing sharper with each passing hour. He reached for his glass of whiskey, only to realize it was empty. With a sigh, he rose and walked to the sideboard, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the silence. As he poured himself another drink, he caught his reflection in the glass-paneled cabinet. His face, once commanding and resolute, now seemed lined with weariness. The weight of years was evident in the silver strands of his hair and the faint droop of his shoulders. "What are you doing, Charles?" he muttered to himself. His voice, though quiet, seemed loud in the stillness of the room. He was a man who prided himself on rationality, on making decisions based on logic and reason. Yet here he was, shaken by a fleeting encounter with a child he knew nothing about. He returned to his chair and stared into the flames, his mind drifting back to the orphanage. He remembered the way Anna had clutched her teddy bear, her small frame dwarfed by the oversized armchair. She hadn't spoken a word, yet her eyes had conveyed a depth of emotion that unsettled him. It wasn't just sadness he had seen there, it was resilience, a quiet determination to endure whatever life threw her way. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine what her life might have been like. Had she known the warmth of a mother's embrace? Or had her days been filled with uncertainty and loss? The thought of her navigating the world alone, without the guidance or protection of a parent, stirred a pang of guilt in him. He had lived a life of privilege and excess, while others, like Anna, struggled for even the smallest comforts. Charles closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair, letting the memories wash over him. He thought of Eleanor's laugh, the way it lit up a room, and how she used to sit by the fire, sketching landscapes and portraits with a delicate hand. If she had been here tonight, what would she have said about Anna? He could almost hear her voice, gentle but firm, urging him to look beyond himself, to consider what truly mattered. The ache in his chest grew stronger, a strange, unfamiliar sensation that he couldn't quite name. It was as if the long, frozen parts of his heart were beginning to thaw, stirred by a force he didn't understand. For years, he had told himself that his life was complete, that he needed nothing more. Yet tonight, as the flames flickered and danced, he felt a stirring of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, perhaps, or the faint whisper of possibility. As the clock struck midnight, Charles rose and extinguished the fire. He stood for a moment, gazing up at Eleanor's portrait, his jaw set with a newfound resolve. "I don't know what it means yet," he said quietly, "but I'm not ready to let it go." With that, he turned and climbed the stairs to his bedroom, his mind still turning over the events of the day. Somewhere in the depths of his heart, a door that had long been closed creaked open, letting in a sliver of light. The following morning, Charles Whitmore awoke to a pale light filtering through the heavy drapes of his bedroom. He lay still for a moment, staring at the intricate plasterwork on the ceiling, his mind returning to the girl at the orphanage, Anna. Her name lingered in his thoughts, as persistent as a melody he couldn't forget. After dressing in his usual tailored suit, he made his way downstairs. The manor was quiet, save for the faint clinking of silverware as Mrs. Hathaway, the housekeeper, laid out his breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of baked bread, but Charles barely noticed as he sat at the long dining table. His appetite had dwindled, replaced by an inexplicable restlessness. He glanced toward the window overlooking the estate grounds. The vast lawns stretched endlessly, bordered by ancient oaks and a hedge maze he hadn't visited in years. The manor, once a symbol of achievement, now felt like a gilded cage. He thought again of Anna and the orphanage, where life was simpler, stripped of the grandeur that now seemed so meaningless. The sound of Mrs. Hathaway clearing her throat drew his attention. "Mr. Whitmore, will you be working from the study today, or shall I prepare the sitting room for visitors?" Charles hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Neither," he said, standing abruptly. "I'll be going out." Mrs. Hathaway's surprise was evident, though she masked it with a polite nod. Charles rarely deviated from his meticulously planned routine, and his sudden announcement left her momentarily flustered. The drive to St. Mary's Orphanage was uneventful, yet Charles found himself gripping the wheel tighter than usual. His mind churned with questions he couldn't answer. Why had that child unsettled him so? What was it about her presence that had pierced through the carefully constructed barriers he had built over the years? As he pulled into the familiar cobblestone drive, he noticed the children playing outside once again. Their laughter carried on the breeze, light and carefree, a sharp contrast to the heaviness he felt. Charles parked the car and stepped out, carrying a leather satchel filled with books and toys he had hastily selected from a local shop that morning. He told himself these were for the children, an excuse to return without raising suspicion, yet he knew that wasn't the entire truth. Inside, Mrs. Cartwright greeted him warmly, her eyes glinting with curiosity at his unannounced visit. "Mr. Whitmore, how unexpected. The children will be thrilled to see you again." Charles forced a polite smile. "I thought I'd bring a few things for the little ones," he said, handing her the satchel. "It's nothing much, just a few books and toys." "That's most generous of you," Mrs. Cartwright said, her voice genuine. "The children adore having visitors, especially someone as kind as you." As she gestured for him to follow her into the common room, Charles felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. He scanned the room, his gaze immediately settling on Anna. She was sitting on the floor with a small group of children, her dark hair falling into her face as she carefully pieced together a puzzle. The teddy bear from the day before sat nearby, its fur worn but clearly cherished. "Anna!" Mrs. Cartwright called gently. "Come here, sweetheart." The girl looked up, her wide eyes flickering with recognition as they met Charles's. Slowly, she stood and approached, clutching the teddy bear tightly to her chest. Charles knelt slightly, lowering himself to her level. "Hello, Anna," he said softly. "Do you remember me?" She nodded but said nothing, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity that made his throat tighten. Up close, the resemblance to Eleanor was even more striking. The same delicate features, the same soulful eyes that seemed to see right through him. Mrs. Cartwright broke the silence. "Anna's had a difficult time adjusting," she explained gently. "She lost her mother in a car accident not long ago, and we haven't been able to locate any family." Charles felt his chest constrict. The idea of this small, fragile child navigating such profound loss was almost unbearable. He wanted to ask more, but hesitated, unsure of his place in her life. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, wrapped package. "I brought this for you," he said, handing it to her. Anna hesitated, then took the package and carefully unwrapped it, revealing a small picture book filled with colorful illustrations. Her fingers traced the cover, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words, simple as they were, struck Charles deeply. He felt an unfamiliar warmth in his chest, a stirring he hadn't experienced in years. For a fleeting moment, the burdens of his past seemed to lift, replaced by a glimmer of something he couldn't quite name. As the afternoon wore on, Charles found himself lingering longer than he intended. He watched Anna from across the room, marveling at her quiet resilience. Despite her sorrow, there was a strength in her, a determination to keep going. It was a quality he had admired in Eleanor, and seeing it in Anna only deepened the strange connection he felt. When it was time to leave, Charles found himself reluctant to go. As he stepped out into the crisp autumn air, he turned back for one last look at the orphanage. Through the window, he saw Anna holding the book he had given her. Her face turned away as she returned to the puzzle. Driving home, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that his life, so carefully planned and controlled, had taken an unexpected turn. For the first time in years, he felt a pull towards something beyond himself, a sense of purpose that both frightened and intrigued him. The days following Charles's second visit to St. Mary's Orphanage passed slowly. Yet, even amid his usual routine of meetings and paperwork, he couldn't escape the quiet pull that kept drawing his thoughts back to Anna. The memory of her solemn face and wide, knowing eyes lingered like a shadow in his mind. He told himself that he was merely curious, but deep down he knew it was more than that. Her presence had awakened a part of him that had lain dormant for years. One crisp afternoon, Charles found himself driving back to the orphanage, his polished Bentley gliding smoothly over the winding roads of the countryside. He hadn't planned this visit, not exactly, but something inside him urged him forward, as though fate were guiding his hand. This time, he carried a more deliberate offering, a stack of children's books and a plush blanket he had chosen himself. They were simple gifts, but they felt oddly significant. As he entered the orphanage, the familiar warmth of Mrs. Cartwright's greeting did little to settle his growing unease. He nodded politely, exchanged a few pleasantries, and allowed her to lead him to the common room. There, amidst the hum of children's chatter, he saw Anna again. She was sitting alone this time, her small frame curled up in an armchair by the window. The late afternoon sunlight bathed her in a golden glow, illuminating the dark curls that framed her face. When Charles approached, she looked up, her expression neither startled nor shy, but calm and expectant. It was as though she had been waiting for him, and the thought sent a strange shiver through him. "Hello, Anna," he said gently, setting the books and blanket on the table beside her. "I thought you might like these." Her eyes flicked to the items briefly before returning to his face. She nodded once, her fingers clutching the well-worn teddy bear in her lap. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles hesitated, unsure how to continue. He wasn't accustomed to interacting with children, much less one as reserved as Anna. Yet there was something about her quiet demeanor that compelled him to stay. He settled into the chair opposite hers, his hands resting on his knees. "Do you like to read?" he asked, his tone awkward but earnest. Anna nodded again, this time with a flicker of interest. She reached for the top book on the stack, a collection of fairy tales, and opened it carefully, as though it were a treasure. Charles watched as her small fingers traced the colorful illustrations, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. It was in that moment that Mrs. Cartwright approached, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her voice low, "there's something you should see." Curious but cautious, Charles rose and followed her into her office. She opened a drawer and retrieved a small, weathered photograph, handing it to him without explanation. When he looked down at the image, his breath caught. It was a portrait of a young woman, her features strikingly familiar. Her dark hair framed a face so much like Eleanor's that Charles's hand trembled as he held the picture. "That's Anna's mother, Margaret," Mrs. Cartwright explained quietly. "She passed away in a car accident several months ago. Anna was the only survivor." Charles's mind reeled. He stared at the photograph, his heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and recognition. Margaret's resemblance to Eleanor was uncanny, more than uncanny. It was as if the past had risen to meet him, demanding answers he didn't know how to give. "Do you know anything else about her?" he asked, his voice strained. Mrs. Cartwright shook her head. "Not much, I'm afraid. Margaret never mentioned any family, and we haven't been able to locate any relatives. It's been a difficult road for Anna." Charles nodded absently, his thoughts racing. He returned the photograph to Mrs. Cartwright and made his way back to the common room, his footsteps heavy. When he saw Anna again, still engrossed in the fairy tale book, an overwhelming wave of emotion washed over him. He felt an ache he couldn't name, a yearning that reached into the deepest corners of his soul. He sat down beside her and tried to compose himself. "Anna," he said after a long pause, his voice softer than before, "may I ask you something?" She looked up, her expression open but cautious. "The photograph of your mother. Do you still have it?" he asked gently. Anna nodded and reached into the pocket of her sweater. She pulled out a small, creased photograph and handed it to him without hesitation. When Charles unfolded it, his heart constricted. It was the same image Mrs. Cartwright had shown him, but this time he noticed a detail he hadn't before. Margaret was wearing a locket, its design unmistakably familiar. It was Eleanor's. Charles's hands trembled as he handed the photograph back to Anna. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. As he drove home that evening, the weight of the revelation settled heavily on his chest. The photograph, the locket, the uncanny resemblance, all of it pointed to a truth he wasn't yet ready to confront. Yet deep down, he knew that his connection to Anna ran deeper than chance. And for the first time in years, the carefully constructed walls around his heart began to crumble. The days following Charles's discovery of the photograph passed in a blur of restless thoughts and unspoken questions. He spent hours pacing the grand halls of Whitmore Manor, his mind circling back to the same point, the striking resemblance between Margaret and Eleanor, and the locket that tied them together. It was not a coincidence. He was certain of that now, but the truth, buried somewhere in the past, eluded him. Charles sat at his desk one morning, staring at the polished mahogany surface. The room was still, save for the ticking of the ornate clock on the mantel. The usual weight of his responsibilities, the meetings, the investments, seemed trivial now. His mind was consumed by a single thought. He had to know the truth about Anna's mother and her connection to Eleanor. He reached for the phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "James Davenport," the man said curtly. "James, it's Charles Whitmore," he replied, his voice steady but low. "I need your help." James, a retired investigator, had worked with Charles decades ago on sensitive matters related to his business. They had drifted apart over the years, but Charles knew James's discretion and thoroughness were unmatched. "I'll do what I can," James replied after a pause. "What's this about?" Charles hesitated, then began to explain. "There's a young girl at an orphanage in Surrey. Her name is Anna. I recently learned that her mother, Margaret, passed away. But there's something unusual. Margaret bears an uncanny resemblance to my late wife, Eleanor. And she had a locket, one that Eleanor used to wear. I need you to find out everything you can about Margaret's past. I need to know if there's a connection." James was silent for a moment, then said, "I'll look into it. Give me a few days." "Thank you," Charles said, relief mingling with apprehension. "I'll be waiting." As he hung up the phone, Charles felt a flicker of hope, tempered by the weight of uncertainty. He had no idea what the investigation might reveal, but he knew he couldn't rest until he had answers. The days stretched on, each one marked by an undercurrent of anticipation. Charles found himself visiting the orphanage more frequently under the guise of delivering gifts or checking on the children's welfare. But his focus remained on Anna, whose quiet presence seemed to draw him in despite her reserved demeanor. During one such visit, Charles found himself sitting with Anna in the garden, a rare sunny day warming the autumn air. She sat cross-legged on the grass, the teddy bear clutched in one arm as she carefully examined a small daisy in the other. Charles watched her silently, marveling at her composure. "Do you like flowers?" he asked after a while. Anna nodded. "They're pretty," she said simply, her voice soft but clear. Charles smiled faintly. "My wife used to love daisies. She'd plant them every spring in the garden at our home." Anna glanced up at him, her expression thoughtful. "Did she have a garden?" "Yes," Charles replied, his gaze distant. "A beautiful one. She spent hours tending to it. She always said flowers made her feel alive." Anna seemed to consider this, then held out the daisy she had been examining. "You can have this one," she said, Charles took the flower gently, his throat tightening. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. As they sat in companionable silence, Mrs. Cartwright approached, her usual warm smile tinged with curiosity. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "I just received a letter from Anna's caseworker. It contains some additional details about her mother's background. Would you care to see it?" Charles felt his pulse quicken. "Yes, I would," he said, rising to follow her. In her office, Mrs. Cartwright handed him a folder containing the caseworker's notes. As he read through the pages, his breath caught. Margaret had been adopted as an infant, her records indicating she had been placed with a family in Yorkshire. There were no details about her biological parents, but the timeline matched the years before Eleanor and Charles had met. His mind raced. Eleanor had once mentioned giving up a child for adoption during her youth, a secret she had shared in a moment of vulnerability. At the time, Charles had brushed it aside, too focused on their present to dwell on her past. But now, faced with the possibility that Anna was his late wife's granddaughter, he felt the weight of that moment with a clarity that shook him to his core. "Is everything all right?" Mrs. Cartwright asked gently, sensing his unease. Charles nodded slowly, though his thoughts were anything but settled. "Yes," he said, closing the folder. "Thank you for showing me this." As he left the office and returned to the garden, his mind churned with the implications of what he had learned. If Margaret was indeed Eleanor's daughter, then Anna was the family he and Eleanor had long dreamed of but never had. The thought filled him with a mix of sorrow and hope, a bittersweet realization that fate had brought him to this moment. As Anna looked up from her spot on the grass, her small face illuminated by the afternoon sun, Charles felt a quiet resolve take hold. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew one thing with certainty: he couldn't walk away from her now. Charles Whitmore sat alone in his study as twilight deepened into night, the room cloaked in shadows despite the soft glow of a desk lamp. The leather-bound books lining the shelves and the faint scent of wood polish usually brought him comfort, but tonight they seemed to close in on him. His mind was heavy with the revelations of the past days, the fragile pieces of a puzzle slowly forming a picture he had never imagined. The possibility that Anna could be Eleanor's granddaughter was both thrilling and heartbreaking. It brought back memories of Eleanor's quiet confession about the daughter she had given up for adoption as a teenager. At the time, Charles had reassured her that the past didn't matter, that their life together was all that counted. Yet now, he felt the weight of her secret as though it were his own. He thought of Anna, her solemn eyes so reminiscent of Eleanor's, and her quiet resilience that seemed far too mature for a child her age. She was a living link to the woman he had loved so deeply and lost so tragically. But the thought also filled him with doubt. What could he, an aging widower with a lifetime of solitude behind him, offer to this child? Was he chasing a fleeting sense of purpose? Or was there something more profound drawing him toward her? The shrill ring of the phone startled him. He picked it up, his voice gruff as he answered, "Whitmore speaking." "It's James," came the familiar voice of the investigator. "I've got something for you." Charles straightened in his chair. "Go on." "I traced Margaret's adoption records," James began. "She was placed with a couple in Yorkshire, as you suspected. But here's where it gets interesting. The couple had some connection to Eleanor, acquaintances from her younger years. It seems she may have known where Margaret ended up, or at least had some idea." Charles felt his heart pound. "Are you saying Eleanor knew her daughter's adoptive parents?" "Possibly," James replied. "There's no definitive proof, but the ties are there. It raises the question of whether she kept tabs on Margaret over the years. One thing's for certain, Margaret grew up unaware of her biological mother's identity. There's no mention of Eleanor in any of the records I've found." Charles exhaled slowly, his thoughts racing. And Anna? Is there any other family? No immediate relatives, James said. Margaret never married, and there's no record of her parents or siblings still being alive. As far as I can tell, Anna is alone. The words hit Charles like a blow. Alone. It was a word he knew too well, a word that defined so much of his own life. He thanked James and hung up, his gaze drifting to the photograph of Eleanor on his desk. Her gentle smile seemed to ask him the same question he had been asking himself. What would she have done? The next day, Charles returned to the orphanage, his resolve tempered by uncertainty. He found Anna in the playroom, seated at a small table with a few other children. She was drawing with colored pencils, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she saw him, her face lit up with a faint but unmistakable smile, a rare and precious expression that stirred something deep within him. "Hello, Anna," he said warmly, kneeling beside her. "What are you drawing?" She held up her paper. It was a simple sketch of a house with a garden, daisies blooming around the front door. Charles's throat tightened at the sight. "Is this where you'd like to live?" he asked softly. Anna nodded. "It's my house," she said, "for me and Mama." The words struck Charles like a knife. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and gently touched her shoulder. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice hoarse. They spent the next hour together, talking quietly as Anna showed him her drawings and told him about her favorite books. For the first time, she seemed to open up, her guarded demeanor softening in his presence. Charles felt a strange sense of fulfillment, as though he were discovering a part of himself he had forgotten existed. As the afternoon waned, Mrs. Cartwright approached with a cautious expression. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice low, "may I speak with you in private?" Charles nodded and followed her to her office. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to him, her hands clasped tightly. "The staff has noticed your visits becoming more frequent," she began, "and your attention to Anna. It's clear that you care for her deeply." "I do," Charles admitted, his voice steady. "She reminds me of someone I lost, someone I loved." Mrs. Cartwright regarded him with a mixture of understanding and concern. "Anna is a special child," she said. "But I must ask, are you prepared for what it would mean to take her into your life? She's been through so much. She needs stability, love, and a future. It's not a decision to take lightly." Charles met her gaze, his expression resolute. "I know what she needs," he said, "and I know what I can give her." Mrs. Cartwright nodded slowly, her expression softening. "Then I suggest you think carefully about what comes next. Anna deserves nothing less than your full commitment." As Charles left the office and walked back to the playroom, he felt the weight of her words settle over him. He watched Anna from a distance, her small figure framed by the fading afternoon light. In that moment, he realized that his life, long defined by loss and solitude, was at a crossroads. The choice before him was not one of duty, but of the heart. The early morning light streamed through the tall windows of Charles's study, casting long shadows over the room's worn rugs and well-loved furniture. Charles sat at his desk, his thoughts consumed by the conversation with Mrs. Cartwright. Her words about stability and commitment rang in his ears, their weight pressing heavily on his chest. Though he had always considered himself a decisive man, confident in his judgments, he found himself grappling with an uncharacteristic uncertainty. The morning's stillness was interrupted by the arrival of a letter from the orphanage. The envelope, bearing the neat handwriting of Mrs. Cartwright, contained updates on Anna's case and a formal request to discuss her future. Charles unfolded the letter slowly, his hand trembling as he read. It was clear that his growing presence at the orphanage had not gone unnoticed by the staff, and now he was being asked to define his intentions. As he set the letter aside, The sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the hallway. Mrs. Hathaway, his housekeeper, entered carrying a tray of tea. Her sharp eyes quickly noticed the furrow in his brow. "Something troubling you, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked as she set the tray on the table beside him. Charles hesitated, then shook his head. "Just matters that require careful thought," he replied, his tone measured. Mrs. Hathaway, who had served the Whitmore household for decades, wasn't fooled. She poured the tea, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "It wouldn't happen to be about the young girl, would it?" she ventured. Charles looked up sharply, surprised by her perceptiveness. "What makes you say that?" Mrs. Hathaway gave him a knowing smile. "You've been preoccupied ever since you started visiting that orphanage. And I've seen the way you look when you return. It's as though you're carrying the weight of the world." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "It's not so simple, Hathaway. There's a child, Anna. She's connected to Eleanor in ways I never expected. And now I feel drawn to her, as though she's a piece of something I lost long ago." Mrs. Hathaway nodded thoughtfully. "And yet you hesitate." "Wouldn't you?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "She's been through so much already. What if I can't give her what she needs? What if I fail her?" Mrs. Hathaway regarded him for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore, you've spent years grieving and building walls around yourself, but perhaps this is an opportunity, not just for her, but for you as well. Sometimes it's not about certainty. It's about courage." Her words struck a chord, though Charles said nothing. After she left and he sat for a long time, staring out the window at the estate's sprawling grounds. The autumn leaves, golden and rust-colored, fluttered in the breeze like fragments of a distant memory. He thought of Anna's small, determined face, the way her eyes seemed to search for answers she couldn't yet articulate. Perhaps Mrs. Hathaway was right. Perhaps this was his chance to give meaning to a life that had felt hollow for so long. Later that afternoon, Charles returned to the orphanage. The air was brisk, carrying the scent of fallen leaves, and the sound of children's laughter greeted him as he stepped through the gates. Inside, he found Anna sitting by the window in the common room, a picture book open on her lap. She looked up as he approached, her expression softening into the faintest of smiles. "Hello, Anna," he said, his voice warm. "What are you reading?" She showed him the book, a collection of fairy tales he had brought on one of his earlier visits. He sat beside her, and they spent the next hour flipping through the pages, Anna occasionally pointing out her favorite illustrations. Though she spoke little, her presence was enough to fill the silence between them. As they read, the headmistress appeared, her expression cautious. "Mr. Whitmore, might I have a word with you?" she asked. Charles nodded and rose, following her into her office. The walls were lined with books and photographs of smiling children, a testament to the lives that had passed through St. Mary's. Mrs. Cartwright gestured for him to sit before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, "it's clear that you've taken a special interest in Anna. And while I have no doubt that your intentions are sincere, I must ask, what do you see as her future? She's at a critical juncture, and we need to ensure that the decisions made are in her best interest." Charles met her gaze steadily. "I've thought about little else these past days," he admitted. "Anna has endured more loss than any child should have to bear, but she's also shown a strength that few adults could muster. She needs a home, a family, and a sense of security. And he hesitated, then continued, "I believe I can give her that." Mrs. Cartwright nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's not a decision to take lightly, Mr. Whitmore. But if you truly feel that you can provide what Anna needs, then I suggest you begin the process of exploring her adoption. It will not be without challenges, but I believe she could benefit greatly from having someone like you in her life." The words settled over him, heavy with meaning. As he left the office and returned to Anna, who was now coloring quietly at the table, he felt the weight of the moment. She glanced up as he approached, her small hand clutching a crayon. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice tinged with a note of worry. "Not yet," he replied, kneeling beside her. "And I'll always come back, I promise." Her gaze lingered on him, her eyes wide with an unspoken question. In that moment, Charles knew that his path, uncertain as it was, had become irrevocably entwined with hers. The afternoon sun cast long, dappled shadows across the estate's gardens, but Charles Whitmore sat in his study, oblivious to the beauty outside. The letter from Mrs. Cartwright lay open on his desk, her gentle yet firm words echoing in his mind. She had urged him to consider carefully, to think not just with his heart, but with a sense of the responsibility he would undertake if he moved forward with Anna. Yet his thoughts were soon interrupted by the arrival of someone he hadn't expected, his estranged sister, Elizabeth. Elizabeth entered the room with her usual brisk energy, her sharp features softened only slightly by the years. Though she shared Charles's silver hair, her demeanor bore none of his quiet introspection. She wore a tailored coat and carried an air of authority that filled the room as she sat across from him without waiting for an invitation. "It's been some time," she began, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Her tone was neutral, but there was a flicker of tension in her voice. Charles set aside the letter, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't realize you were in Surrey," he replied, keeping his tone polite but distant. "I wasn't," she said. "But I've been hearing things, Charles, about you and about a little girl at an orphanage." He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "News travels fast." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. "When it concerns you, it always does. People are talking, Charles. They're saying you've become attached." "Care to explain?" "There's nothing to explain," he said, his voice measured. "I've taken an interest in Anna. She's a remarkable child, and she's had a difficult life." Elizabeth tilted her head, studying him. "And what, exactly, do you intend to do about it? Adopt her at your age? Do you really think that's wise?" Her words struck a nerve, but Charles held his composure. "Anna has no one," he said firmly. "If I can give her a home, some stability, then I will." Elizabeth sighed, her expression softening slightly. "Charles, I'm not saying you don't mean well, but have you thought this through? A child isn't a business venture. You can't just decide to take her in and assume it will all work out." "This isn't about me," he replied, his voice rising slightly. "It's about her. She's Eleanor's granddaughter." The revelation stunned Elizabeth into silence. She blinked, her composure faltering for the first time. "What are you talking about?" "Margaret, Anna's mother, was Eleanor's daughter," he explained, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "The child she gave up for adoption before we met." Elizabeth stared at him, her eyes wide. "Eleanor never told me." "She didn't tell anyone," Charles said quietly. "Not until years after we were married, and even then I didn't press her for details. I thought it was her past to carry. Now I see that it's more than that. Anna is part of her legacy, part of my legacy." Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, her face unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the grandfather clock. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than before. "Charles, I can see why this matters to you," she said, "but you're not a young man anymore. Raising a child, especially one who's been through so much, it's not something to take lightly." "I know that," he replied, his voice firm, "but this isn't just about what I want. It's about what's right. Anna deserves a chance, and I'm willing to give it to her." Elizabeth sighed again, rubbing her temples. "You've always been stubborn," she said with a faint smile. "But if you're serious about this, then you need to be prepared. People will question you, doubt your intentions, and Anna, she'll need more than just your name. She'll need your time, your patience, your heart." "I understand," he said simply. Elizabeth rose from her chair, smoothing her coat. "I hope you do," she said, "because if you fail, it won't just be you who pays the price. It will be her." As she left the room, Charles remained seated, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Elizabeth's words, though harsh, held a kernel of truth. Adopting Anna would be the most challenging thing he had ever undertaken. But it was also, he realized, the most important. That evening, Charles sat in the library, gazing at a photograph of Eleanor that he had moved to his desk. Her smile, captured in the golden light of a long-ago afternoon, seemed to speak to him, urging him forward. He thought of Anna, of her quiet strength and the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. He thought of the promise he had made to her, a promise that now felt as sacred as any vow he had ever taken. The sound of footsteps drew his attention, and Mrs. Hathaway appeared in the doorway. "Will you be needing anything else tonight, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, thank you, Hathaway. But, there's something I'd like you to prepare for tomorrow." "Of course," she said, her tone curious. "I'll be going to the orphanage," he said, "and I'd like to speak with Mrs. Cartwright about the next steps. It's time I made things official." Mrs. Hathaway smiled gently. "Very good, sir." As she left, Charles leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day settling over him. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew one thing for certain. He would not let Anna face the world alone. The pale grey sky of the next morning seemed to mirror Charles Whitmore's contemplative mood as he sat on the edge of his bed, staring out the window at the sprawling gardens below. The decision he had made the night before had solidified overnight, but now, in the quiet light of dawn, its weight pressed heavily on him. He felt the familiar pangs of doubt creeping in, questioning his ability to take on the monumental task of raising a child. Was he, a man nearing 70, truly capable of offering Anna the life she deserved? Charles dressed slowly, his hands lingering on the buttons of his shirt as if delaying the inevitable. The echo of Elizabeth's voice from the day before still lingered in his mind, her warnings both stern and compassionate. Yet beyond her doubts, he remembered the look in Anna's eyes when he had promised her he would always return. That look, so full of fragile trust, spurred him forward. By the time Charles arrived at the orphanage, the early morning bustle of the children had already filled the air with laughter and shouts. He stood in the courtyard for a moment, watching them play, their carefree joy a sharp contrast to the turmoil he felt. He spotted Anna near the edge of the garden, kneeling in the dirt as she carefully arranged small pebbles into a pattern only she understood. When she noticed him, her face lit up with a soft smile. "You came back," she said simply, her voice carrying both surprise and relief. "I told you I would," Charles replied, kneeling beside her. "What are you working on?" "It's a path," Anna said, pointing to the winding line of stones she had created. "So people don't get lost." Charles's heart ached at the simple poignancy of her words. "That's very thoughtful of you," he said. "Everyone could use a little help finding their way sometimes." She looked up at him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Do you ever get lost?" The question, so innocent yet so profound, caught him off guard. He hesitated before answering. "I have, many times," he admitted. "But sometimes, finding the way back is the most important part." Anna seemed to accept this, nodding solemnly before returning her focus to her stones. Charles watched her for a moment longer, marveling at her quiet resilience, before standing and making his way toward Mrs. Cartwright's office. Inside, the headmistress greeted him with her usual warmth, though her expression carried a hint of curiosity. "Mr. Whitmore, it's always a pleasure. How can I help you today?" Charles took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I've made a decision, Mrs. Cartwright," he said. "I want to begin the process of adopting Anna." Her reaction was calm, though her eyes reflected the gravity of his words. She gestured for him to sit, taking her place behind the desk. "I had a feeling you might say that," she said, "but I must ask, are you certain? This is not a decision to be made lightly, especially considering Anna's needs. She's been through more loss and upheaval than most children her age. She will need more than just a home. She will need patience, understanding, and an unwavering commitment." "I understand that," Charles said, his voice steady. "And I won't deny that this will be a challenge. But Anna, she's not just any child. She's Eleanor's granddaughter. I see so much of her in Anna, not just in her features, but in her spirit. I believe this is what Eleanor would have wanted, and I believe I can give Anna the stability and love she deserves." Mrs. Cartwright studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes searching for any trace of hesitation. "You're a man of great means, Mr. Whitmore," she said finally. "But this is about more than providing financial security. It's about being present for her, emotionally and physically. Are you ready to dedicate yourself to her, even when it's difficult?" "Yes," Charles replied without hesitation. "I've spent too many years hiding behind my work, convincing myself that solitude was my only option. But Anna has shown me that there's still more to life, something worth fighting for. I'm ready to take this step." Mrs. Cartwright nodded, her expression softening. "Very well. There will be a process to, of course, interviews, home visits, legal considerations, but if you're willing to go through it, I believe you may be exactly what Anna needs." As Charles left her office, a sense of purpose began to settle over him, though it was accompanied by an undercurrent of apprehension. He found Anna still in the garden, carefully smoothing the dirt around her stone path. She looked up as he approached, her small face full of quiet expectation. "Anna," he said, crouching beside her, "I need to ask you something." She tilted her head, listening intently. "How would you feel," he began slowly, "if I became your family?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed to hold her breath. "You mean, like a dad?" "Yes," Charles said, his voice soft. "Would that be something you'd want?" Anna didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her path, tracing the stones with her finger. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think I'd like that." The simplicity of her response struck Charles to his core. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll make it happen," he said. "I promise." For the first time, he saw a spark of hope in her eyes, a fragile light that filled him with both joy and determination. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for Anna, he was willing to face whatever challenges lay in their path. The following weeks brought a flurry of activity that Charles Whitmore had not experienced in years. The process of adoption, as Mrs. Cartwright had warned, was complex and demanding. There were forms to fill out, interviews to attend, and inspections to prepare for. Each step brought new challenges, and yet Charles faced them with a determination that surprised even himself. One crisp morning, Charles sat in the grand dining room of Whitmore Manor, surrounded by stacks of documents. Legal jargon filled the pages, their meaning obscured by a tangle of clauses and stipulations. He adjusted his reading glasses and let out a frustrated sigh. Across the table, Mrs. Hathaway worked quietly, sorting through correspondence and occasionally glancing at him with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You've certainly taken on a great deal, Mr. Whitmore," she said, breaking the silence. "I can't remember the last time I saw you this engaged." Charles looked up, his brow furrowed. "It's no small task, Hathaway," he admitted, "but it's worth every moment. Anna deserves a chance, a real chance at a stable, happy life. And I intend to give it to her." Mrs. Hathaway nodded, her expression softening. "You're doing a good thing, sir. She's lucky to have someone like you." Charles smiled faintly, though a trace of doubt lingered in his eyes. "I only hope I can be enough." The sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, interrupting their conversation. Mrs. Hathaway rose to answer it, and moments later returned with a somber expression. "It's Mrs. Cartwright," she said. "She's brought someone with her." Charles stood quickly, smoothing his jacket as he made his way to the sitting room. There, Mrs. Cartwright stood with a younger couple, their appearance polished and professional. The woman's face was kind but serious, while the man exuded quiet confidence. Charles felt a pang of unease as he greeted them. "Mr. Whitmore," Mrs. Cartwright began, her tone cautious. "This is Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence. They've expressed interest in adopting Anna." Charles's chest tightened, though he kept his composure. He extended a hand to the couple, his voice steady. "It's a pleasure to meet you." The Lawrences smiled politely, though there was a tension in the air. "We've heard a great deal about Anna," Mrs. Lawrence said. "She seems like a wonderful child." "She is," Charles replied, his tone firm but measured. "She's been through more than most children her age, but she's incredibly strong." Mrs. Cartwright stepped in, her expression neutral. "The Lawrences have recently moved to the area. They're interested in providing a home for Anna and have already begun the necessary paperwork." Charles felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. "I've already started the adoption process myself," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "Anna and I have developed a strong bond. I believe she feels at home with me." The Lawrences exchanged a glance, their smiles faltering. "We understand," Mr. Lawrence said, "but we believe we can offer her a fresh start, a stable environment where she can thrive." "And I intend to do the same," Charles countered, his voice steady. "Anna needs more than stability. She needs someone who understands her past, someone who can connect with her on a deeper level." "I believe I can be that person." The conversation continued, each side presenting their case with measured tones but undeniable conviction. Mrs. Cartwright listened carefully, her expression unreadable. When the discussion concluded, she promised to consider both parties carefully and left with the Lawrences. As the door closed behind them, Charles stood in the foyer, his fists clenched at his sides. The encounter had shaken him, not because he doubted his ability to care for Anna, but because it forced him to confront the reality that others might challenge his claim to her. He returned to the sitting room, sinking into a chair as Mrs. Hathaway approached. "They seemed determined," she said gently. "So am I," Charles replied, his voice resolute. "Anna is not a prize to be won. She's a child who needs love, stability, and understanding. I won't let anyone take that from her." The days that followed were marked by a quiet tension. Charles continued to visit Anna at the orphanage, their bond growing stronger with each meeting. He read to her, played games, and listened as she shared fragments of her thoughts and dreams. Yet a shadow loomed over their time together, the possibility that she might be taken away. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Anna looked up at him with a question that caught him off guard. "Are you going to leave me?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. Charles's heart ached at the vulnerability in her tone. He reached out, taking her small hand in his. "Never," he said firmly. "I'm here for you, Anna, always." She studied his face, her wide eyes searching for reassurance. "Even if someone else wants me, especially then," he replied. "You're not just someone I care about, Anna. You're family, and family doesn't leave." The words seemed to soothe her, and she leaned against him, her small frame fitting perfectly into the curve of his arm. Charles held her close, his resolve strengthening with each passing moment. No matter what challenges lay ahead, he would fight for Anna with all the strength he had left. The morning dawned grey and foreboding. a chill in the air that seemed to seep into Charles Whitmore's very bones as he prepared for the meeting that could shape the course of Anna's future. The dining room table at Whitmore Manor, once a place of grand gatherings, was now cluttered with legal documents, character references, and a carefully prepared statement of intent. Every paper represented a step in his commitment to adopting Anna, but today those steps felt more like hurdles, each one higher than the last. Charles adjusted his tie, the silk knot stiff against his neck. He caught his reflection in the ornate mirror hanging above the fireplace and noted the lines that creased his face more deeply than they had a year ago. His silver hair seemed grayer in the dim light, but his eyes held the fire of resolve. Today, he would face not only the court, but the challenge of proving himself to those who doubted his capacity to raise a child. When he arrived at the courthouse, the atmosphere was heavy with formality. The high ceilings and echoing footsteps lent a sense of gravity to the proceedings. Mrs. Cartwright greeted him in the waiting area, her presence a welcome source of calm amid the tension. She clasped his hand briefly, her warm smile conveying encouragement. "You're doing the right thing, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. "Anna deserves someone who truly understands her." He nodded, though the weight of the day ahead made words feel inadequate. Soon, he was ushered into the courtroom, its polished wooden benches and imposing benches creating an almost theatrical stage for the drama about to unfold. Seated across from him were the Lawrences, the couple who had also expressed interest in adopting Anna. Their polished appearance and air of competence reminded Charles of the well-to-do families he often encountered in business. They were poised, smiling in a way that seemed practiced, as though they had rehearsed this moment. The judge entered, a woman of middle years with sharp eyes and a demeanor that commanded respect. She wasted no time in beginning the proceedings, her tone firm but fair as she addressed each party in turn. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, her voice measured, "you are 68 years old and a widower. Can you explain to this court why you believe you are the best candidate to adopt Anna?" Charles rose slowly, the weight of the moment pressing heavily on his shoulders. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "Your Honor, I understand that my age may raise questions about my ability to care for Anna, but what I can offer her goes beyond years or convention. Anna has endured tremendous loss, and in her I see a reflection of someone I once loved dearly, my late wife, Eleanor." He paused, drawing a deep breath before continuing. "Anna is Eleanor's granddaughter, though I only recently discovered this connection. It has deepened my resolve to provide Anna with the love and stability she deserves. I have the resources, the time, and most importantly, the commitment to ensure that she feels safe, cherished, and supported." The courtroom was silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The judge nodded thoughtfully, her expression unreadable as she gestured for the Lawrences to respond. Mrs. Lawrence stood, her voice confident but measured. "Your Honor, while we respect Mr. Whitmore's connection to Anna, we believe our family can provide her with the environment she needs to thrive. We are younger, have experience raising children, and can offer her a home where she will be surrounded by siblings and community." The judge listened carefully, her gaze shifting between the two parties. "Both sides have presented compelling arguments," she said. "However, the decision must ultimately rest on what is in Anna's best interest. I would like to hear from Mrs. Cartwright, who has been directly involved in Anna's care." Mrs. Cartwright rose, her presence calm and reassuring as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, I have worked with children for many years, and I can say with certainty that Anna's bond with Mr. Whitmore is unique. He has shown an unwavering dedication to her well-being, and she has flourished under his care and attention. While the Lawrences are undoubtedly capable and compassionate, Anna's emotional needs align closely with the support Mr. Whitmore has already begun to provide. Her testimony seemed to resonate with the judge, who nodded thoughtfully. But the tension in the room remained palpable, the outcome uncertain. Charles glanced at the Lawrences, who exchanged a quiet, determined look. As the proceedings continued, Charles was asked to elaborate on how he planned to navigate the challenges of raising a young child at his age. He spoke of his commitment to creating a loving home, of the adjustments he had already begun making to his life, but as the hours wore on, the weight of the scrutiny began to wear on him. At one point, during a brief recess, Charles stepped outside to gather his thoughts. The crisp autumn air felt like a balm against the tension that had built within him. He thought of Anna's quiet smile, the trust she had placed in him, and the promise he had made to her. When the court reconvened, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter the outcome, he would continue to fight for Anna, to honor the bond they had forged and the legacy of Eleanor that had brought them together. The judge's voice broke through his thoughts, drawing his attention back to the present. "I will review the evidence and testimonies presented here today," she said. "A decision will be made in due course. Until then, both parties are encouraged to reflect on what is truly in Anna's best interest." As the session adjourned, Charles left the courtroom with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. He knew the fight was far from over, but his resolve remained steadfast. For Anna, he would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The courthouse was behind him, but the uncertainty of the judge's deliberation loomed large over Charles Whitmore's thoughts as he returned to the familiar silence of Whitmore Manor. The grandeur of his home, with its marble floors and towering bookshelves, felt hollow as he stepped into the echoing foyer. Mrs. Hathaway, ever attentive, met him at the door with a searching look. "How did it go, sir?" she asked, her voice measured, though her concern was evident. Charles loosened his tie and sighed. Setting down the leather briefcase he had carried to court, it went as expected. Questions, counter-arguments, and promises to consider all sides, but nothing is decided. Mrs. Hathaway nodded, folding her hands neatly before her. "You've done all you can for now. The rest is in the judge's hands." Charles gave her a faint smile, though the weariness in his eyes betrayed his unease. "And Anna's fate hangs in the balance," he murmured, almost to himself. He made his way to his study, the room dimly lit by the afternoon's fading light. He poured himself a modest glass of whiskey and sat heavily in his chair, staring at the stack of papers on his desk. The polished surface reflected the photograph of Eleanor he kept nearby, her serene expression, a reminder of all he had loved and lost. As he swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Hathaway appeared again, a hesitant look on her face. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. A Mrs. Mary Sullivan." Charles frowned, the name unfamiliar to him. "Did she say what this is about?" "She said she used to work at St. Mary's Orphanage," Mrs. Hathaway replied, "and that it concerns Anna." Intrigued, Charles set down his glass and rose, smoothing his jacket as he followed Mrs. Hathaway to the sitting room. There, a woman in her 60s stood waiting, her frame slight but her posture confident. She wore a simple wool coat, her grey hair neatly pinned back, and her expression was one of quiet determination. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Mary Sullivan. I was a nun at St. Mary's for many years before I retired." Charles shook her hand, gesturing for her to sit. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Sullivan. I understand this is about Anna." She nodded, her eyes steady as she spoke. "Yes. I wanted to share something that may be of use to you. I was at St. Mary's when Eleanor was a young woman. She was just a girl, really, when she came to us. expecting Margaret. She confided in me during her stay, and I became one of the few people who knew her secret. Charles leaned forward, his attention sharpened. You knew about Margaret? Yes, Mary said. Eleanor was heartbroken to give her up, but she believed it was the only way to ensure Margaret had a better future. Over the years, Eleanor and I kept in touch. She never stopped thinking about her daughter, and she often wrote to me about her regrets. Charles felt a pang in his chest, imagining Eleanor's private anguish. And Anna, he asked, did Eleanor ever learn about her granddaughter? Mary shook her head. No, by the time Margaret became a mother, Eleanor had already passed, but I believe if she were here today, she would want Anna to be with you. Eleanor often spoke of you, Mr. Whitmore. She said you were the one thing in her life that made her feel whole. The room fell silent for a moment, Mary's words sinking deeply into Charles's heart. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but thick with emotion. Thank you, Mrs. Sullivan. What you've shared means more to me than I can say. Mary reached into her bag and retrieved a small envelope. I thought you should have this, she said, handing it to him. It's one of the letters Eleanor wrote to me. I think it will give you strength in the days ahead. Charles took the envelope with trembling hands, his gratitude evident in his expression. You've done a great kindness, Mrs. Sullivan. I won't forget it. As Mary rose to leave, Charles escorted her to the door, his mind racing with the implications of her visit. The letter in his hand felt like a connection to Eleanor, a thread that linked the past to the present. Once alone, he returned to his study and carefully opened the envelope. The letter, written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, spoke of her deep love for Charles and the pain she carried over the child she had given up. If ever the chance comes to make right what I could not, the letter read, I hope you will have the courage to do what I could not. You have always been my strength, Charles. The words brought tears to his eyes, a rare vulnerability breaking through the composure he so often maintained. Eleanor's voice seemed to echo in the quiet room, urging him forward. That evening, as Charles sat by the fire with the letter resting on the arm of his chair, he resolved to face whatever lay ahead with renewed purpose. The fight for Anna was no longer just about securing her future. It was about honoring Eleanor's memory and the family they had always dreamed of building together. The flickering flames cast shadows across the room, but in his heart, a quiet light began to grow. The days after Mary Sullivan's visit felt heavy with an impending sense of confrontation. Charles Whitmore moved through his grand estate with purpose, but his thoughts were constantly drawn back to the letter she had given him. Eleanor's words, penned with so much tenderness and regret, served as both comfort and reminder of the duty he now carried. He read the letter often, finding in it a quiet strength that pushed him forward. One crisp morning, as Charles stood at the window of his study, gazing out at the frost-covered gardens, a call came that shattered the relative peace he had been clinging to. Richard Grayson, a tabloid journalist notorious for his relentless pursuit of sensational stories, had somehow caught wind of the adoption case. The butler had barely finished announcing the name when Charles's face hardened. "Put him through," Charles said curtly, his voice firm. When the journalist's oily tone greeted him, Charles felt his grip on the phone tighten. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Richard Grayson with the Daily Globe. I was hoping you might comment on the developing story about your bid to adopt a young orphan. It's quite the human interest piece." "There is no story," Charles said flatly, "and I won't entertain baseless gossip." "On the contrary," Grayson replied smoothly, "there's plenty of interest here. A reclusive millionaire, a mysterious child with ties to your late wife. There's even talk of other potential adoptive parents. It's practically written itself. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to set the record straight." Charles felt the familiar burn of anger rise in his chest, but he kept his tone controlled. "You'll get no such satisfaction from me. I won't have a child's life turned into your fodder for headlines." "Well then," Grayson said, his tone growing sharper, "I suppose the public will make do with what I've uncovered about Eleanor's past. A young woman forced to give up her child, secrets buried in wealth and privilege. Quite the scandal, wouldn't you say?" The words hit Charles like a blow, and he took a measured breath to steady himself. "If you publish anything about Eleanor or Anna, I will personally see to it that you face legal action for every lie you print." Grayson chuckled. "A man in your position would do well to keep his tone civil, Mr. Whitmore. You wouldn't want to make this any messier than it already is." The call ended abruptly, leaving Charles staring at the phone in his hand, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. His anger was matched only by his fear that Eleanor's memory would be tarnished, and that Anna, so fragile and vulnerable, might be caught in the crossfire. Later that day, Charles reached out to his legal team, ensuring that every measure was in place to protect both Anna and Eleanor's legacy. The sense of urgency spurred him to action, but the undercurrent of helplessness lingered, gnawing at him. The following afternoon, Charles made his way to St. Mary's Orphanage, determined to spend time with Anna and find solace in her presence. The orphanage, with its modest rooms and the lively chatter of children, had become a sanctuary of sorts for him, a place where the world's noise seemed to fade, even if only briefly. Anna was in the playroom, seated at a small table with a puzzle spread before her. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting up with a smile that warmed his heart. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but welcoming. "Hello, Anna," Charles replied, taking a seat beside her. "What are we working on today?" "It's a castle," she said, pointing to the picture on the puzzle box. "It's got a moat and everything." As they worked together, Charles found his thoughts calming, the simplicity of the moment grounding him. Yet, as he watched Anna carefully fit the pieces together, he couldn't shake the weight of what Grayson had threatened to unleash. "Anna," he said gently, his voice tinged with hesitance, "if someone ever says things about your past, things that might sound confusing or unkind, I want you to know something." She looked up at him, her dark eyes wide and attentive. "You are loved," he continued. "Not because of where you come from or what's happened in your life, but simply because of who you are. Don't ever forget that." Anna studied him for a moment before nodding, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Okay," she said simply, returning to her puzzle. The trust in her small gesture filled Charles with a renewed sense of resolve. He would not let her down. That evening, as Charles sat by the fire in his study, a knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Mrs. Hathaway entered, her expression concerned. "Sir, there's someone at the gate," she said. "A man claiming to be a journalist. He's asking for a comment." Charles stood immediately, his jaw tightening. "Tell him to leave," he said firmly, "and if he doesn't, contact the authorities." Mrs. Hathaway nodded, retreating quickly. Alone again, Charles felt the walls of his controlled world pressing in around him. For years, he had lived a life of quiet seclusion, untouched by the outside world's chaos, but now, that world had found him, threatening not only his peace, but the future of the child he had come to love. As the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the room, Charles took out Eleanor's letter once more. Her words, filled with hope and faith in him, steadied his resolve. He would fight, not just for Anna, but for the promise he had made to Eleanor and for the life he believed Anna deserved. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but Charles was determined. He would not let Richard Grayson or anyone else take away the family he was trying so hard to build. Act 3, Complication and Rise. Part 14. The days following Richard Grayson's unwelcome intrusion weighed heavily on Charles Whitmore. Though the journalist had been dismissed from the gates of Whitmore Manor, his threat to expose Eleanor's past and twist Anna's story into a sordid tale lingered in Charles's mind. The sense of urgency to protect Anna deepened, and with it, so did his determination to unravel the secrets of her lineage. Late one evening, Charles sat in his study, poring over the notes James Davenport had provided from his investigation. Each document, each line of text, seemed to offer fragments of a story that was still incomplete. The connection between Eleanor, Margaret, and Anna was undeniable. But there was more, details hidden in the folds of the past that Charles was determined to uncover. As he sifted through the papers, a particular document caught his eye. It was an adoption record for Margaret, detailing the couple who had taken her in all those years ago. Their names, Joseph and Edith Fletcher, were faintly familiar, though Charles couldn't immediately place them. He leaned back in his chair, the firelight casting flickering shadows across the room, and closed his eyes, searching his memory. Suddenly, it came to him. The Fletchers had been acquaintances of Eleanor's parents, a family she had occasionally mentioned in passing. They were distant connections, not close enough to raise suspicion, but familiar enough to make Eleanor's decision to place Margaret with them seem deliberate. Charles felt a pang of sorrow as he realized how carefully Eleanor had orchestrated her daughter's adoption, ensuring Margaret would be placed with people she trusted, even at the cost of her own happiness. The discovery spurred Charles into action. He reached for the phone and dialed James's number, the late hour forgotten in his urgency. "James, it's Charles," he said when the line connected. "I need you to dig deeper into the Fletchers. There's something there, something Eleanor must have known, and I need to understand it." James, ever efficient, promised to begin immediately, and Charles hung up, his thoughts racing. The revelation that Eleanor had likely kept some connection to Margaret's life, however tenuous, filled him with both admiration and heartbreak. It was yet another testament to the quiet strength she had carried through her life. A strength that now inspired him to fight for Anna with all he had. A few days later, James arrived at Whitmore Manor with new information. Charles greeted him in the study, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation as the investigator laid out his findings. "I traced the Fletchers' history as you requested," James began, pulling out a folder. "Joseph Fletcher passed away many years ago, but Edith lived into her 90s. Interestingly, she corresponded with Eleanor sporadically over the years, letters that were never made public. It's clear that Eleanor kept a distant but watchful eye on Margaret's life." Charles's breath caught. "Do we have those letters?" "Unfortunately, no," James said, "but I did find something else. The Fletchers were close friends with a woman named Clara Bennett, who was present at Margaret's wedding. Clara's name appears repeatedly in documents related to the family, suggesting she may have played a significant role in their lives." "Where is Clara now?" Charles asked. "She lives in a small village not far from here," James replied. "If anyone can shed light on the connection between the Fletchers and Eleanor, it's likely her." Charles wasted no time. Within hours, he was on the road, the countryside stretching before him as he made his way to Clara Bennett's modest home. The village was quiet, its narrow streets lined with stone cottages that seemed untouched by time. When he arrived at Clara's address, he was struck by the simplicity of the house, its garden neatly tended despite the autumn chill. An elderly woman answered the door, her sharp eyes softened by a warm smile. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, after he introduced himself. "I've heard of you. Please, come in." Inside, Clara's home was cozy, filled with photographs and trinkets that spoke of a life rich in memories. She gestured for Charles to sit, offering him tea before settling into a chair opposite him. "I understand you knew the Fletchers," Charles began, his tone respectful but direct. Clara nodded, I did. They were good people, Joseph and Edith. They loved Margaret as their own. And Eleanor? Charles pressed gently. Did she have contact with them after Margaret's adoption? Clara's expression grew thoughtful. Not openly, she said. But I know Edith and Eleanor exchanged letters. Edith often spoke of how much Margaret reminded her of Eleanor, though she never told Margaret the truth. She thought it best to let her grow up without the weight of that knowledge. Charles nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. And Anna, he asked, did Eleanor know of her? Clara hesitated, then shook her head. No, by the time Anna was born, Eleanor had already passed. But if she had known, I believe she would have wanted Anna to be with you. Eleanor loved deeply, and she carried a great deal of regret for the choices she was forced to make. She would have seen Anna as a chance to heal old wounds. The words struck Charles deeply, and he sat in silence for a moment, absorbing their weight. Thank you, Mrs. Bennet, he said at last. You've given me more than you know. As he left Clara's home, the crisp air biting at his face, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. The threads of Eleanor's life, so carefully woven, now connected to Anna's, and he was determined to honor them. The road ahead remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would not let Eleanor's sacrifices or Anna's future be tarnished by the meddling of others. The fight for Anna was no longer just about legalities. It was about love, legacy, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The wind carried a chill as Charles Whitmore stepped out of his Bentley, the gravel crunching beneath his feet as he approached St. Mary's Orphanage once again. Though the autumn air had turned sharper, there was a warmth in Charles's chest that refused to wane. His conversation with Clara Bennet had solidified a resolve that had been forming for weeks. The threads of Eleanor's past, Margaret's life, and Anna's uncertain future were now woven together in a tapestry that Charles was determined to protect. Inside the orphanage, the children's laughter echoed faintly through the halls. Mrs. Cartwright greeted him at the door, her expression kind but tinged with weariness. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, leading him toward her office. "I'm glad you've come." "There's been a development." Charles raised an eyebrow, his step quickening as they entered the small office. Once seated, Mrs. Cartwright wasted no time in explaining. "The court has scheduled a formal hearing to determine Anna's placement," she began, her tone careful. "It's clear that both you and the Lawrences have strong cases, and the judge is taking this very seriously." Charles nodded, his expression unreadable. "When will the hearing take place?" "In 2 weeks," Mrs. Cartwright replied. "This will be your opportunity to present everything you've done to prepare for Anna's adoption. The Lawrences, of course, will do the same." The mention of the Lawrences caused a flicker of unease to cross Charles's face. Though he respected their intentions, the idea of losing Anna to another family was unbearable. The bond he had formed with her, fragile but precious, felt like a lifeline, not only for her but for himself as well. "I'll be ready," he said firmly. "Whatever it takes, I'll prove that Anna belongs with me." Mrs. Cartwright nodded, her expression softening. "I know how much she means to you, Mr. Whitmore, and I believe she feels the same, but this will be a difficult process. The Lawrences are well prepared, and their family dynamic is appealing to the court." Charles leaned forward, his voice low but resolute. "This isn't about appearances or convenience. It's about what Anna truly needs. And I intend to show the court that I understand her, that I can give her the life she deserves." Mrs. Cartwright smiled faintly, the warmth of her faith in him shining through. "I don't doubt your dedication," she said, "but I must warn you, this hearing will likely draw attention. Journalists like Richard Grayson have a way of exploiting situations like this. You'll need to be prepared for scrutiny." Charles's jaw tightened at the mention of Grayson. The man whose unwelcome presence continued to cast a shadow over his efforts. "I'll handle him," he said simply. "My priority is Anna." After their meeting, Charles found Anna in the playroom, seated at a small table with a stack of crayons and sheets of paper. She was drawing a house, its simple lines and bright colors, a reflection of the home she longed for. When she noticed him, her face brightened with a shy smile. "Hello, Anna," he said, taking a seat beside her. "What are you working on today?" "It's a house," she said, holding up the drawing. "It's got a big garden and lots of flowers." Charles studied the picture, his chest tightening at the innocence of her dream. "It's beautiful," he said. "I think you'd grow the most wonderful garden." Anna smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Do you think so?" "I know so," Charles replied, "and one day we'll plant it together." The promise hung between them, a quiet reassurance that neither of them could fully articulate, but both understood. As they continued to talk, Charles felt the weight of the coming hearing press against the joy of the moment. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but the connection he shared with Anna gave him the strength to face them. That evening, back at Whitmore Manor, Charles sat by the fire, the room bathed in a warm glow. Spread before him on the coffee table were papers detailing the next steps in the adoption process. Legal requirements, character references, and a proposed plan for Anna's future, all meticulously prepared but daunting nonetheless. As he sifted through the documents, his thoughts drifted to Eleanor. He pictured her in the garden she had loved so much, her laughter carrying on the breeze as she tended to her daisies. Her memory was no longer just a source of grief, but a guiding force, urging him to fight for the family they had both dreamed of. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie, and Mrs. Hathaway entered with a tray of tea. "You've been at this all evening, sir," she said, setting the tray down. "Perhaps you should rest." Charles smiled faintly. "Rest will have to wait, Hathaway. There's too much at stake." The housekeeper regarded him with a knowing look. "You care for her deeply," she said, her voice gentle. "It's clear to anyone who sees you together. She's given me something I thought I'd lost," Charles admitted, his voice low. "A sense of purpose, a chance to make right what I failed to do before." Mrs. Hathaway nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Then hold on to that, sir. It will carry you through." As she left the room, Charles returned to his work, his focus sharpening with each passing moment. The challenges before him were formidable, but his resolve was unwavering. He would face the hearing, the scrutiny, and the judgment of others with the same determination that had carried him through a lifetime of trials. For Anna, and for the legacy of the woman who had brought them together, Charles was prepared to fight with everything he had. The path ahead was uncertain, but his heart was steadfast, and his love for Anna gave him the courage to press on. The day of the final court hearing arrived with an air of solemnity, the morning shrouded in a mist that clung to the cobblestone streets like a heavy curtain. Charles Whitmore stood before the mirror in his bedroom, adjusting the knot of his tie with deliberate precision. The lines on his face seemed more pronounced today, not from age alone, but from the weight of what lay ahead. Downstairs, the house was unusually quiet. Even Mrs. Hathaway, who typically moved with a brisk efficiency, seemed subdued as she handed him his coat. "All the best to you today, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. "You've done everything you could." Charles nodded, offering a faint smile. "Thank you, Hathaway. Let's hope it's enough." The drive to the courthouse felt longer than usual, the familiar landscape passing in a blur as Charles rehearsed in his mind the words he would soon deliver. His determination was unwavering, but the stakes of the day pressed heavily on him. He thought of Anna, her small hand in his as they walked through the garden, her quiet laughter as they planted daisy seeds in the soft earth. Those moments had become his anchor, his purpose. The courthouse was bustling when he arrived, the corridors echoing with footsteps and murmured conversations. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The Lawrences were already seated, their polished demeanor a sharp contrast to the quiet resolve Charles carried. Mrs. Cartwright offered him a reassuring nod from across the room, her faith in him a small but significant comfort. The judge entered, her presence commanding immediate silence. She was a woman of middle years, her sharp eyes betraying both wisdom and compassion. As the proceedings began, each party was given the chance to present their case. The Lawrences spoke first, their arguments precise and persuasive. They painted a picture of a stable home, filled with children and the structure they believed Anna needed. When it was Charles's turn to speak, he rose slowly, the weight of the moment evident in his every movement. He approached the bench with measured steps, his hands resting lightly on the wooden podium. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but imbued with emotion, "I stand here today not as a man of wealth or status, but as someone who has come to love Anna deeply. She is not just a child to me, she is family. Through her, I see the reflection of my late wife, Eleanor, and the life we dreamed of building together." He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom before returning to the judge. "Anna has endured more loss in her young life than most of us could imagine. What she needs now is not just stability, but understanding. She needs someone who sees her for who she is, who can help her heal and grow." Charles's voice faltered slightly, but he pressed on. "I may not fit the traditional image of a parent. I am older, and my life has been marked by solitude. But in Anna, I have found a purpose I thought was lost to me. She has given me a reason to hope again, and I am determined to give her the love and security she deserves." The courtroom was silent as Charles returned to his seat. He felt the eyes of the Lawrences on him, but he did not look their way. Instead, he focused on the judge, whose expression remained inscrutable. As the hearing continued, Mrs. Cartwright was called to testify. Her words were measured and thoughtful, painting a vivid picture of the bond she had witnessed between Charles and Anna. "Mr. Whitmore has shown an extraordinary commitment to Anna," she said. "He has been patient, attentive, and unwavering in his dedication to her. In my years of working with children, I have rarely seen such a genuine connection." The judge listened intently, her gaze shifting between Mrs. Cartwright and Charles. When the testimony concluded, she called for a brief recess, leaving the courtroom in a tense hush. During the break, Charles stepped outside to gather his thoughts. The air was crisp, the mist lingering in the corners of the courthouse steps. He leaned against the stone railing, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "Mr. Whitmore." The voice startled him, and he turned to see Mrs. Lawrence standing nearby. Her expression was gentle, free of the guarded professionalism she had displayed earlier. "I just wanted to say," she began, hesitating slightly, "no matter what happens today, I admire your dedication to Anna. It's clear how much you care for her." Charles inclined his head, his voice low but sincere. "Thank you. She's an extraordinary child." Mrs. Lawrence smiled faintly. "Yes, she is. And she's fortunate to have so many people who care about her." As she walked away, Charles felt a pang of respect for her. Despite their differences, they both wanted what was best for Anna. That shared goal gave him a sense of quiet resolve as he returned to the courtroom. When the judge re-entered, the room fell silent once more. She addressed the court with measured words, acknowledging the strengths of both parties. "This decision," she said, her tone firm but compassionate, "is not one I take lightly. Both Mr. Whitmore and the Lawrences have demonstrated their deep care for Anna. However, my decision must rest on what I believe is in her best interest." As she continued, Charles felt his pulse quicken, each word carrying the weight of the future he had fought so hard to build. The world seemed to narrow to the judge's voice, her verdict hanging in the air like the final note of a long-held melody. The judge's words hung in the air, each one weighted with significance as she delivered her decision. The courtroom was silent, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. Charles Whitmore sat still, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Across the room, the Lawrences wore expressions of composed expectancy, though Mrs. Lawrence's gaze flickered toward Charles, betraying a trace of unease. "This court acknowledges the strengths and sincerity of both parties," the judge began, her voice steady but firm. "Mr. and Mrs. Lawrence have presented a compelling case, offering a stable and nurturing family environment that would benefit any child. Their home, filled with other children and a strong support system, is undoubtedly well suited to raising Anna." Charles's heart sank slightly, though he forced himself to remain composed. The knot in his chest tightened as the judge continued. "However," she said, her tone softening slightly, "it is the unique bond between Mr. Whitmore and Anna that this court finds particularly significant. Anna has endured tremendous upheaval in her young life, and her connection to Mr. Whitmore offers her not only stability but also a profound sense of belonging and identity. It is clear that Mr. Whitmore's dedication to Anna is unwavering, and his efforts to understand and meet her needs reflect a deep and genuine love." The room seemed to hold its breath as the judge reached her conclusion. "Therefore, this court grants guardianship and the right to adoption to Mr. Charles Whitmore." The words echoed in Charles's mind, their meaning taking a moment to fully sink in. Relief washed over him, accompanied by a wave of emotion so powerful it left him momentarily speechless. Across the room, the Lawrences exchanged glances, their disappointment evident but tempered by grace. Mrs. Lawrence nodded slightly in Charles's direction, a silent acknowledgement of his victory. The judge's gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing. As the courtroom began to empty, Charles remained seated for a moment, his hands trembling slightly as he exhaled a deep breath. Mrs. Cartwright approached, her face alight with warmth. "Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly. "Anna will be so happy." Charles nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Cartwright, for everything." Later that afternoon, Charles returned to the orphanage, his heart pounding as he prepared to share the news with Anna. The weight of the day had lifted, replaced by a quiet joy that felt both unfamiliar and deeply welcome. When he arrived, the children were playing outside, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. Anna stood at the edge of the garden, her small figure framed by the golden light of the setting sun. "Anna!" Charles called, his voice gentle but firm. She turned, her face lighting up as she recognized him. Dropping the small watering can she had been holding, she ran toward him, her dark curls bouncing with each step. When she reached him, she stopped abruptly, her wide eyes searching his face. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tinged with both hope and hesitation. Charles knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. "Anna," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "the judge decided that you'll be coming home with me. We're going to be a family." For a moment, Anna simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, a smile so radiant it seemed to light up the entire garden. Without a word, she threw her arms around his neck, holding him tightly. Charles closed his eyes, his heart full to bursting as he held her close. "Really?" she whispered, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Really?" Charles replied, his voice thick. "You're coming home." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Cartwright, who stood nearby, her hands clasped and her eyes glistening. "We'll start the transition process right away," she said softly. "Anna can be with you by the end of the week." Charles nodded, his gaze never leaving Anna's face. "Thank you," he said simply. That evening, as Charles returned to Whitmore Manor with Anna, the house felt different, warmer, more alive. Mrs. Hathaway greeted them at the door, her typically reserved demeanor giving way to a rare smile. "Welcome home, Miss Anna," she said, her voice kind and full of warmth. Anna looked up at Charles, her eyes wide. "This is my home?" she asked softly. "It is now," Charles said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Our home." They spent the evening exploring the manor together. Charles showed Anna the garden Eleanor had tended, sharing stories of her love for daisies and the peaceful afternoons they had spent planting them. He watched as Anna's small hands gently touched the flowers, her eyes filled with wonder. When bedtime came, Charles tucked Anna into the room that had been carefully prepared for her. The walls were painted a soft blue, and the bed was adorned with the quilt he had chosen himself. Anna clutched her teddy bear as she lay beneath the covers, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her smile still lingering. "Good night, Anna," Charles said, his voice soft. "Good night," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, after a pause, she added, "Dad." The word hit Charles like a wave, filling him with a joy so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Sleep well, my dear," he said, his voice trembling. As he left the room, closing the door quietly behind him, Charles felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The journey that had brought him here, the doubts, the struggles, the moments of despair had all been worth it. For the first time in a long while, the sprawling halls of Whitmore Manor felt like a home, filled not with echoes but with life, love, and the promise of new beginnings. The early days of Anna's life at Whitmore Manor were filled with tentative steps toward a shared rhythm, like the careful tuning of an instrument before the music begins. Charles Whitmore, who had lived so long in the quiet echo of his own solitude, now found his days punctuated by the sound of laughter, the patter of small feet on the marble floors, and the gentle hum of a child rediscovering joy. But joy, Charles quickly learned, was not without its frailty. One evening, as autumn rain tapped softly against the windows, Anna complained of feeling unwell. At first, it seemed like a passing malaise, a slight fever, a flush to her cheeks, but as the hours wore on, her condition worsened. Charles, seated by her bedside, watched with mounting concern as her breathing grew labored and her small frame trembled with chills. "Mrs. Hathaway," he called, his voice urgent but steady. The housekeeper appeared at the doorway, her expression grave as she took in the scene. "I'll fetch the doctor," she said without hesitation, her years of service to the Whitmore family preparing her for moments such as these. Charles nodded, turning his attention back to Anna. "You'll be all right," he murmured, brushing damp curls from her forehead. "The doctor will be here soon." Anna's eyes fluttered open, her gaze glassy but searching. "Will you stay?" she asked weakly, her small hand reaching for his. "Of course, my dear," Charles replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." The doctor arrived swiftly, a kind but efficient man in his 50s who had tended to the Whitmore household on occasion. After a thorough examination, his expression softened, though his tone remained serious. "She's fighting an infection," he said, addressing Charles as they stood in the hallway. "Nothing we can't manage, but she'll need rest and careful attention." "The next 24 hours will be crucial," Charles nodded, his heart heavy but resolute. "She'll have everything she needs." True to his word, Charles stayed by Anna's side throughout the night. The grandeur of Whitmore Manor faded into the background as the hours stretched on, the once looming walls now dwarfed by the fragility of the moment. He read to her from her favorite books, his deep voice filling the quiet room as he wove tales of knights and castles, of bravery and triumph. Though Anna drifted in and out of sleep, the faint smile that crossed her lips told him she was comforted. As dawn broke, the rain eased into a gentle drizzle, and Anna's fever began to subside. Charles, who had not left her bedside, allowed himself a moment of relief. He reached for the small teddy bear she always kept close and tucked it into her arms, its worn fur a testament to her resilience. "You're very brave, Anna," he said softly, his voice tinged with both admiration and sorrow. "Braver than I could ever be." Anna's eyes opened slowly, her gaze meeting his. "You're brave too," she whispered, her voice hoarse but sure. "You stayed." The simplicity of her words struck Charles deeply, and for a moment he could not speak. He reached out, his hand gently resting on her small shoulder. "Always," he said finally, "I'll always stay." The days that followed saw Anna's gradual recovery, each moment of progress a quiet triumph. Charles marveled at her resilience, though the experience had left him with a newfound awareness of how fragile their happiness could be. He took nothing for granted, savoring each smile, each laugh, as though they were rare and precious gifts. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Anna turned to him with a question that seemed to come from a place of deep contemplation. "Why do you love me?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Charles, taken aback by the question, regarded her with a gentle smile. "Why wouldn't I love you?" he replied, his tone light but sincere. Anna shrugged, her gaze dropping to the daisies she was carefully arranging in a small vase. "I don't know. I just wonder." Charles reached for her hand, his touch firm but comforting. "I love you because of who you are, Anna. Because you're kind and strong and full of wonder. And because you've brought so much light into my life." Anna looked up at him, her dark eyes wide with emotion. "You brought light to me too," she said simply. The words, spoken with the unguarded honesty of a child, filled Charles with a profound sense of gratitude. He had spent so many years adrift, the loss of Eleanor leaving a void he thought could never be filled. Yet here, in the presence of this small, courageous girl, he felt whole again, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the garden in a warm, golden glow. Charles and Anna sat together in comfortable silence. The trials they had faced, the battles yet to come, all seemed distant in that moment. What mattered was the bond they shared, a bond forged not by blood, but by love and a shared determination to create a future filled with hope. As the days settled into a more familiar rhythm following Anna's recovery, Whitmore Manor seemed to exhale a sigh of relief. Yet, Charles Whitmore could not escape the undercurrent of fear that had taken root during those harrowing nights at her bedside. He found himself drawn to Eleanor's old letters once more, searching for wisdom in her words, as though she could guide him through the uncertainties that still loomed. One crisp autumn morning, Charles discovered an envelope tucked inside the pages of an old book on Eleanor's shelf. Its edges were frayed, the handwriting faint but unmistakably hers. As he unfolded the letter, his heart quickened, for it was addressed not to him, but to "the family I never had." The weight of its words drew him into a silence so profound that the distant hum of the estate seemed to disappear. The letter began with Eleanor's characteristic tenderness. "To those I could not hold, I have thought of you every day. My choices, though necessary, have left an ache that time has not eased. To the child I gave away, know that you were my first gift of love, and I prayed for your happiness from afar. And to the family I dreamed of but never saw fully realized, forgive me for the years lost, but know my heart was always with you. If you ever find this letter, let it be a bridge between us. Let it remind you that even in absence, love endures." Charles's hands trembled as he read. The letter seemed to reach across time, binding together the fragments of Eleanor's life and the future he was trying so desperately to build for Anna. It was not simply a confession of sorrow, but a testament to Eleanor's enduring hope that the family she had longed for might one day find healing. That evening, Charles shared the letter with Anna. They sat in the library, the fire casting flickering shadows across the shelves as he read it aloud. Anna, curled up beside him with her teddy bear clutched tightly, listened intently, her young face alight with both curiosity and quiet wonder. "Was she talking about me?" Anna asked softly when he finished. "I believe she was," Charles replied, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "And about Margaret, your mother, and about us?" Anna looked thoughtful, her small fingers tracing the edges of the letter. "She wanted us to be happy," she said. Charles nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder. "She did, and I think she would be, knowing we found each other." The warmth of the moment was interrupted by the sharp ring of the telephone. Charles excused himself, his heart sinking slightly at the thought of another intrusion into their peace. When he answered, it was James Davenport on the other end, his voice low and urgent. "Charles," James began, "I've uncovered something important. It concerns Anna's mother, Margaret." "What is it?" Charles asked, his tone calm but edged with apprehension. "It appears Margaret's adoptive parents, the Fletchers, left behind records that suggest Eleanor may have been more involved in their lives than we initially thought. There are letters, financial transactions, and even personal notes that tie her to Margaret's upbringing, though she kept it at a distance." Charles felt his breath catch. "Do you have access to these records?" "I do," James replied. "And there's one more thing. The Fletcher's estate included a trust fund, one that was meant for Margaret's child. It was never claimed." The implications of James's words struck Charles with the force of a revelation. Eleanor had done everything in her power to ensure Margaret and her family were provided for, even if it meant working in the shadows. And now that legacy had extended to Anna, binding her even more tightly to the life Charles was trying to offer her. "Bring everything to me," Charles said firmly. "I want to see it." The next day, James arrived at Whitmore Manor with a box of documents. Charles pored over the papers, each one a thread in the tapestry of Eleanor's quiet sacrifices. Among them was a photograph of Margaret as a young woman, standing beside a man Charles assumed was her husband. In her arms, she held a baby with dark curls and wide eyes, Anna. Charles stared at the photograph for a long moment, his chest tightening with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Here was the proof of Eleanor's love, carried through generations and now resting in his care. He placed the photograph on the desk beside the letter, the two pieces of history converging in a way that felt both overwhelming and profoundly right. As Charles finished reviewing the documents, James leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You've fought hard for Anna," he said, "but it's clear you're not just doing this out of duty. You care for her deeply." "I do," Charles replied simply. "She's my family," James nodded, his tone softening. "Then it seems Eleanor's dream has come true in a way she might never have imagined." That evening, as Charles tucked Anna into bed, he felt the weight of Eleanor's letter and the discoveries of the day pressing gently but firmly on his heart. He leaned down, brushing a stray curl from Anna's forehead as her eyes fluttered closed. "Good night, Anna," he whispered. "You're safe now. And you're loved." As he left her room, closing the door softly behind him, Charles felt a sense of peace, unlike any he had known in years. The pieces of Eleanor's life, Margaret's journey, and Anna's future had come together in a way that felt both extraordinary and inevitable. For the first time, Whitmore Manor truly felt like a home, a place where love, though hard-won, had finally taken root. The arrival of winter brought a quiet transformation to Whitmore Manor. Snow blanketed the sprawling grounds in a serene white, softening the harsh lines of the trees and hedges. The grand estate, once imposing in its stillness, now felt alive with warmth. Inside, the fireplaces crackled and the scent of pine wreaths filled the air, a reflection of the season's approach. Charles Whitmore, for the first time in years, found himself looking forward to the holidays with something resembling joy. Anna, now fully settled into her new life, moved through the house with a lightness that mirrored her growing comfort. Each room she entered seemed to brighten, her presence filling the once empty halls with laughter and song. She had taken to following Mrs. Hathaway around the kitchen, learning to bake cookies and begging for stories about her mother, Margaret, and even Eleanor. One evening, as Charles sat by the fire in the study, reviewing correspondence from the estate's trustees, Anna wandered in, holding a small wooden box. Her expression was a mix of curiosity and excitement as she climbed into the chair opposite him. "Look what I found," she said, setting the box on the table between them. Charles leaned forward, recognizing the item immediately. It was a music box, intricately carved with patterns of vines and flowers. He had almost forgotten about it. It had belonged to Eleanor. He reached for the box, running his fingers over the familiar design. "This was your grandmother's," he said softly. "She loved this music box." Anna's eyes widened. "Can we open it?" Charles nodded, carefully lifting the lid. The familiar tune of an old lullaby drifted out, its notes delicate and haunting. As the music played, a hidden compartment at the bottom popped open, revealing a folded piece of paper tucked inside. Charles frowned, his heart quickening as he gently retrieved the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was another letter from Eleanor. Anna leaned closer, her dark eyes full of wonder. "What does it say?" Charles unfolded the letter, his voice steady but filled with emotion as he began to read aloud. "To the family I never had, if you are reading this, then perhaps fate has been kinder to us than I dared to hope. My greatest regret in life was the distance that separated us, the choices I made, and the chances I lost. Yet my love for you, my dreams of the life we might have shared, were always with me. If this music box has found its way to you, know that you are loved beyond measure. Forgive me for the silence of the years, for the words I could not say, and know that I am with you in every memory, in every moment of happiness you create together." The room fell silent as the last words of the letter lingered in the air. Charles looked up to see Anna staring at him, her expression both solemn and hopeful. "She wanted us to be happy," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She did," Charles replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And she wanted us to be together." Anna reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. "We are together now," she said simply. Charles smiled, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it brought tears to his eyes. He set the letter gently back into the music box, closing the lid as the lullaby faded. The days leading up to Christmas were a flurry of activity. Charles, with Anna's enthusiastic help, decorated the manor as it had not been decorated in years. Garlands of greenery adorned the banisters, and twinkling lights were strung across the tall evergreen tree that stood proudly in the grand hall. Mrs. Hathaway supervised from the sidelines, her usually stoic demeanor softened by the joy that seemed to radiate from Anna. On Christmas Eve, Charles found himself in the sitting room, watching as Anna placed the last ornament on the tree. She turned to him with a bright smile, her cheeks flushed from the warmth of the fire. "Do you think Grandma would like it?" she asked. Charles nodded, his gaze soft. "She would have loved it." Anna settled into his lap, leaning against him as they admired the tree together. "Tell me more about her," she said. "About Grandma Eleanor." Charles smiled, his voice rich with affection as he began to speak. He told her about Eleanor's love of gardening, her laugh that could brighten even the darkest days, and her strength in the face of life's challenges. He shared stories of their early days together, the dreams they had shared, and the love that had endured even through her absence. As he spoke, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. Eleanor's memory, once a source of pain, now felt like a gift, a bridge connecting the past to the present and, perhaps, the future. Later that night, after Anna had gone to bed, Charles stood in the garden, the cold air biting at his cheeks. He looked up at the clear night sky, the stars shining brightly above. In the stillness, he felt Eleanor's presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet assurance that he was where he was meant to be. "I hope I've made you proud," he murmured, his breath visible in the crisp air. "And I hope you see her, Eleanor. She's everything we dreamed of." As he turned to go back inside, he felt a sense of closure, as though the weight he had carried for so long had finally been lifted. The future still held uncertainties, but for the first time he faced it with hope and a heart full of love. Whitmore Manor, once silent and somber, was now a home. And in its halls, the laughter of a little girl echoed, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the unyielding bonds of family. The new year arrived with a gentle snowfall, blanketing the gardens of Whitmore Manor in a pristine white that seemed to reflect the fresh start Charles Whitmore had found. The days passed in a steady rhythm, filled with simple joys, Anna's laughter echoing through the halls, quiet evenings spent reading by the fire, and the warmth of a shared purpose that united them as a family. One morning, as Charles sat at the kitchen table enjoying his tea, Anna appeared in the doorway clutching a sketch pad. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Look what I made," she announced, placing the pad in front of him. Charles adjusted his glasses and examined the drawing. It was a simple yet charming depiction of Whitmore Manor, complete with its towering windows and sprawling gardens. In the foreground, she had drawn herself and Charles standing side by side, her small hand in his. Above them, she had written in neat, careful letters, "Our home." Charles felt his throat tighten as he looked at the picture. "It's wonderful, Anna," he said, his voice warm. "You've captured the manor perfectly." Anna grinned. "It's because it feels like home now," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. The weight of her words settled over him, filling him with a quiet pride. For so long, Whitmore Manor had been a place of echoes and memories, its grandeur masking the emptiness within. Now it was alive, a true home where love and laughter flourished. "Would you like to hang it in the study?" he asked. "I think it belongs somewhere special." Anna nodded eagerly, and together they found a spot above the fireplace. As Charles carefully placed the frame on the wall, he felt a sense of permanence in the gesture, as though the house itself acknowledged the transformation it had undergone. As winter gave way to early spring, the routines of their new life settled into place. Charles found himself spending more time in the garden, often with Anna at his side. They planted flowers and tended to the shrubs, Eleanor's favorite daisies blooming once again under their care. One afternoon, as they worked together, Anna paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "Do you think Mum would have liked it here?" she asked softly. Charles set down his spade, wiping his hands on a cloth before kneeling beside her. "I think she would have loved it," he said. "She would have been so proud of you, Anna." "Just as I am," Anna smiled, her dark eyes reflecting a quiet understanding that seemed far beyond her years. "I wish I could have known her," she said. Charles nodded, his gaze drifting to the daisies swaying gently in the breeze. "She's a part of you," he said, "in every kind word you say, in your courage, in your love for life. That's how she lives on." Anna considered his words, then reached for his hand. "And Grandma Eleanor?" she asked. Charles smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "She's a part of you too, in your strength and your determination, and I believe she's watching over us, proud of the family we've become." The weeks passed with a sense of quiet contentment. Though Charles remained mindful of the fragility of their happiness, he worked to ensure Anna's future, meeting with lawyers and trustees to finalize arrangements that would secure her well-being. Though the process was often tedious, it gave him a sense of purpose that had long eluded him. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Anna looked up from the book she was reading. "Do you think we could visit Grandma Eleanor's grave someday?" she asked. "I'd like to thank her." Charles was struck by the sincerity of her request. "Of course," he said. "We'll go when the weather is warmer." "I think she would like that very much," Anna nodded, her small hand resting on his arm. "She gave me you," she said simply. Charles felt his chest tighten with emotion. "And you gave me a reason to keep going," he replied. "You've brought so much light into my life, Anna, more than I ever thought possible." The room fell silent as they sat together, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Charles felt a profound sense of gratitude for Anna, for the second chance he had been given, and for the quiet strength of Eleanor's legacy that had brought them together. One early spring morning, as the first blossoms began to appear in the garden, Charles and Anna took a walk through the estate. The air was crisp and fresh, the promise of new beginnings evident in the budding trees and chirping birds. Anna skipped ahead, her laughter ringing out as she chased a butterfly across the lawn. Charles watched her, his heart full. She had blossomed in the months since coming to Whitmore Manor, her once guarded demeanor replaced with a confidence and joy that brought life to the entire estate. As he followed her, he realized that the house, once a symbol of loss, had become a place of healing and renewal. In that moment, he felt Eleanor's presence, not as a shadow of sorrow, but as a gentle reminder of the love that had endured across generations. He knew their journey was far from over, but he faced the future with a sense of hope he had not known in years. Whitmore Manor, once silent and cold, was now a sanctuary filled with love, laughter, and the unbreakable bond between a man and the child who had given him a second chance at life. The warmth of spring brought a vibrant energy to Whitmore Manor, as if the house itself was awakening alongside the blooms in the garden. Charles Whitmore found his days increasingly centered around Anna, whose presence had transformed the vast estate from a place of memory into one of life and renewal. The once solemn halls now echoed with laughter, and Charles's own step carried a lightness he had not felt in years. One quiet evening, as twilight settled over the estate, Anna approached Charles with a question that had been lingering in her young mind. "Can we visit Grandma Eleanor's grave soon?" she asked, her voice soft but certain. Charles looked up from the book he'd been reading, her words tugging at a place deep within him. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I think it's time." The journey to the small cemetery where Eleanor rested was short, but Charles felt each mile as though it bridged not just distance, but the years of grief and longing that had shaped his life. He and Anna traveled together in quiet anticipation, the early spring landscape rushing past the windows of the car. When they arrived, the cemetery was bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. A gentle breeze rustled the budding trees, and the sound of birdsong filled the air. Charles guided Anna to Eleanor's grave, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as they approached. The headstone was simple and elegant, inscribed with Eleanor's name and the years of her life. Charles knelt beside it, his heart heavy with the weight of memories. Anna stood beside him, clutching a small bouquet of daisies they had picked from the garden that morning. "Hello, Eleanor?" I'm happy, and I think you'd be happy too. I love you, even though I didn't know you." Charles felt his chest tighten, tears threatening to fall as he listened to Anna's earnest words. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder as they knelt together in the quiet of the cemetery. For a long moment, they stayed there, the silence filled with the unspoken connection between past and present. Charles felt a sense of peace wash over him, as though Eleanor herself were there, watching over them and blessing the life they were building together. On the way back to Whitmore Manor, Anna was quiet, her small face thoughtful as she gazed out the window. Charles watched her, sensing the depth of her reflection. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Anna nodded, turning to him with a faint smile. "I'm glad we went," she said. "It feels like I know her better now." Charles smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "She would have been very proud of you, Anna, just as I am." Anna leaned against his arm, her small hand reaching for his. "We're a family, aren't we?" she asked, her voice quiet but sure. "We are," Charles replied, his voice steady, "and we always will be." As the days turned into weeks, the sense of peace that had settled over Whitmore Manor grew stronger. Charles found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment, the years of solitude after Eleanor's passing, the chance encounter at St. Mary's Orphanage, and the trials that had tested his resolve. One evening, as he and Anna sat together in the library, she asked him to tell her more about Eleanor. Charles hesitated for a moment, then began to speak, his voice rich with affection. "She was kind," he said, "and strong. She had a way of making everyone around her feel important, as though they were the most special person in the world." Anna listened intently, her small face alight with curiosity. "Did she love flowers like I do?" she asked. "She did," Charles replied with a smile. "Her favorite were daisies. She said they were simple but beautiful, just like life should be." Anna's brow furrowed in thought. "Do you think she's happy now?" she asked. Charles nodded, his voice firm. "I do. She always wanted a family, and I think she'd be happy knowing we've made one." Anna smiled, her hand reaching for his. "Me too." As the fire crackled in the hearth, Charles felt a sense of contentment unlike any he had known before. The life he and Anna had built together was far from perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs. Whitmore Manor, once a symbol of loss, now stood as a testament to resilience, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family. For the first time in years, Charles allowed himself to look toward the future with hope. And in the quiet of the evening, as he sat with Anna by his side, he felt that the life Eleanor had dreamed of was finally, beautifully unfolding. As summer cast its golden glow over Whitmore Manor, the estate became a haven of warmth and light. The gardens were in full bloom, with vibrant flowers lining the pathways and the gentle hum of bees filling the air. Charles Whitmore found solace in the rhythms of the season, tending to the garden with Anna by his side. She had taken to helping him with a diligence and curiosity that brought new life to the once quiet grounds. One morning, as the sun rose high over the estate, Charles stood at the edge of the garden, surveying their work. Rows of daisies, Eleanor's favorite, swayed gently in the breeze. Anna appeared beside him, her small hands carrying a watering can too big for her slight frame. "They're so pretty," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I think Grandma would love them." Charles nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "She would. She always said daisies were a reminder of life's simple beauty." Anna set the watering can down and turned to him, her face serious. "Do you think we're making her happy?" Charles crouched beside her, meeting her gaze with a warmth that softened the lines of his face. "I believe we are, Anna. She wanted us to be happy, to live our lives fully." And I think we're doing that." Anna considered his words for a moment, then smiled, her expression bright. "I think she'd be proud of you." The sincerity of her statement struck Charles deeply, and for a moment, he was at a loss for words. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And she'd be proud of you too, my dear." The manor itself had begun to reflect the changes within. Where once its halls had been filled with silence, now they resonated with the hum of activity. Rooms long left unused were now vibrant with purpose as Anna's presence breathed life into every corner. Mrs. Hathaway, once reserved in her demeanor, had taken on a more maternal role, guiding Anna in the ways of the household and sharing stories of its history. One afternoon, as the three of them sat together in the kitchen, Anna brought out her sketch pad. "I want to draw the whole house," she announced. "Every room." Mrs. Hathaway chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "That's quite the project, young lady. Do you think you're up to it?" Anna grinned. "I can do it. I want to show everyone how beautiful it is now." Charles watched the exchange with quiet amusement, his heart swelling with pride. The house, once a symbol of his solitude, had become a place of creativity and connection. He saw in Anna's determination a reflection of Eleanor's spirit, her ability to bring light to even the darkest places. As the weeks passed, Charles turned his attention to ensuring Anna's future. He met with the trustees of his estate, laying out plans for a trust fund that would secure her education and provide for her needs. The discussions, though often lengthy and complex, gave him a sense of purpose that felt deeply fulfilling. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Charles found Anna in the library. She was curled up in the armchair by the fire, her sketchpad resting on her knees as she worked diligently on a drawing. When she saw him enter, she looked up with a smile. "Did you have a good meeting?" she asked. "It went well," Charles replied, settling into the chair opposite her. "We're making sure everything is in place for your future." Anna tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "Do you worry about me?" Charles hesitated, then nodded. "I do. But it's because I care about you so much. I want to make sure you're safe and happy, no matter what." Anna set her sketchpad aside and leaned forward, her small hands resting on the arms of her chair. "I'm happy now," she said firmly, "because I'm with you." Charles felt a lump rise in his throat, her words resonating deeply. "And I'm happy because of you," he said softly. "You've brought so much light into my life, Anna. More than I ever thought possible." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Charles found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here, the trials, the doubts, and the moments of quiet joy that had made it all worthwhile. On a warm summer evening, Charles and Anna stood together on the balcony overlooking the gardens. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Anna leaned against the railing, her face alight with wonder as she took in the view. "It's so beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It is," Charles agreed, his gaze fixed on the scene before them. "And so are you, Anna. You've made this place more beautiful than it's ever been." Anna looked up at him, her dark eyes shining. "You've made me happy too." Charles smiled, his heart full. "Then I suppose we've done something right." As the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Charles felt a profound sense of peace. The life he and Anna had built together was not perfect, but it was real. It was filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a brighter future, a future that now seemed as endless and full of possibility as the stars above. The soft light of late summer filled the sitting room of Whitmore Manor, where Charles and Anna were engrossed in sorting through a collection of Eleanor's belongings. The activity had become a cherished ritual, a way of discovering the threads that bound their lives to hers. Each item they unearthed carried with it a memory, a story, or a sense of connection to the woman whose presence still lingered in the walls of the house. That afternoon, as Anna opened a small chest tucked away in the corner of the room, she let out a gasp of delight. "Look at this!" she exclaimed, holding up an intricately carved music box. Its wood was polished to a soft sheen, and delicate patterns of flowers and vines adorned its surface. Charles smiled, recognizing the box immediately. "Ah, Eleanor's music box," he said. She treasured that. Anna carefully turned the key on the side, and the familiar melody of an old lullaby filled the room. As the music played, she noticed a tiny compartment at the bottom of the box that she had not seen before. With a gentle tug, she opened it to reveal a folded note tucked inside. "Grandpa," she said, handing it to him with wide eyes, "there's something in here." Charles's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper, his breath catching when he recognized Eleanor's handwriting. The letter, though short, was written with her characteristic elegance. "To the family I never had. If this note finds you, then perhaps the dreams I once carried have come true. My love for you, though distant, has always been unshakable. May this house, this life, be filled with the joy and laughter that eluded me, but that I now wish for you. Forgive my absence, but know that my heart has always been with you." The room fell silent as Charles read the words aloud. When he finished, he looked at Anna, who was watching him intently, her expression a mixture of curiosity and understanding. "She wrote it for us," Anna said softly. "Even though she didn't know it would be us," Charles nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "She hoped for this," he said, "for a family, for love to fill these walls." Anna reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. "We're her family now," she said, "and we're making her wish come true." Charles felt his chest tighten with gratitude and pride. "Yes, we are," he said, his voice steady. "And we'll continue to every day." In the days that followed, the music box and Eleanor's note took a place of honor in the sitting room, a reminder of the journey that had brought them to this point. Charles found himself reflecting more deeply on the life he had shared with Eleanor and the legacy she had left behind. Her words, filled with both sorrow and hope, inspired him to continue building the life they had dreamed of, a life filled with purpose, connection, and love. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the estate, Charles and Anna took a walk through the garden. The daisies, now in full bloom, swayed gently in the evening breeze. Anna carried a small basket, picking flowers as they walked. "Do you think Grandma Eleanor would like these?" she asked, holding up a handful of daisies. "I think she would love them," Charles replied. "She always said daisies were simple but beautiful, just like the most important things in life." Anna smiled, her gaze drifting over the garden. "I like that," she said. "It makes me think of her." As they walked, they came to a small bench near the edge of the garden, where they sat together. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, and the sky above was painted with hues of orange and pink. "I've been thinking," Anna said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe we could do something special for Grandma Eleanor, something to show her we're happy." Charles looked at her, his heart swelling with affection. "What do you have in mind?" Anna hesitated, then smiled. "We could plant more daisies. A whole field of them, just for her." Charles's smile widened. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said. "We'll start tomorrow." Anna beamed, her excitement palpable. "I'll help," she said. "We can make it the most beautiful garden ever." As they sat together, watching the sun sink lower in the sky, Charles felt a deep sense of peace. The life he had built with Anna was not just a fulfillment of Eleanor's wishes, but a testament to the resilience of love and the power of hope. Whitmore Manor, once a place of silence and sorrow, had become a sanctuary of light, laughter, and new beginnings. And in that moment, as the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Charles felt a quiet certainty that Eleanor was watching over them, her spirit as present as the daisies blooming in the garden. The air was crisp and cool as Charles Whitmore and Anna made their way through the small cemetery on the outskirts of the village. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the world feels suspended in a moment of calm. The sky was a soft grey, and the dew clung to the grass underfoot. In Anna's arms was a bouquet of daisies, freshly picked from the garden they had nurtured together. Charles carried a basket filled with small stones and a notebook. He had spent the night writing, putting into words the thoughts and emotions that had swirled in his heart since Eleanor's passing and Anna's arrival. This visit, he realized, was as much for him as it was for Anna, a chance to honor the past while embracing the life they had built. When they reached Eleanor's grave, Anna knelt gently, arranging the daisies with great care. "I brought these for you, Grandma," she said softly, her voice carrying the innocence of a child but the depth of someone much older. Charles stood silently for a moment, his eyes fixed on the headstone. The words engraved there, "Eleanor Whitmore, beloved wife and dreamer of love," seemed to glow faintly in the muted light. He crouched beside Anna, placing his basket on the ground and removing a small stone. "We used to leave stones like these when we visited family graves," he explained to Anna. "It's a way of saying we were here, that we remember." Anna reached for a stone, her small fingers curling around it. "Can I leave one too?" "Of course," Charles said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "It's your way of telling her you're part of the family." Anna placed the stone carefully on the grave, then looked up at Charles. "Do you think she knows we're here?" Charles smiled, his heart swelling with love. "I think she does, Anna, and I think she's very proud." He opened the notebook and read aloud from the letter he had written, his voice strong but tender. "Eleanor, you are missed every day. Your love and your dreams have shaped this life, even in your absence. Anna and I are here together because of the hope you left behind. Thank you for believing in a family we could still become. Thank you for the love that endures." As he finished, his voice caught slightly, and he cleared his throat. Anna reached for his hand, her touch grounding him in the moment. "Do you want to say anything?" Charles asked her. Anna nodded, her dark curls bouncing slightly. She looked at the grave, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Grandma," she said softly, "for making a place for me, for giving me Grandpa. I love you." Her words, so simple and heartfelt, brought tears to Charles's eyes. He reached out, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "She would have loved you, Anna," he said, "and so do I." As they walked back to the car, the weight of the visit felt lighter than Charles had expected. Instead of sorrow, he carried a sense of peace, a certainty that Eleanor's love had transcended the years and the losses. He glanced down at Anna, who skipped ahead slightly, her face alight with the joy of someone who knew she was deeply loved. "Grandpa," she called, turning to face him, "can we make more daisies in the garden? Like, a lot of them?" Charles chuckled, his heart warming at her enthusiasm. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he replied. "We'll make a whole field of them." Anna grinned, her excitement palpable. "And we can call it Grandma's Garden." The name settled in Charles' heart like a seed taking root. "Yes," he said softly, "Grandma's Garden. It's perfect." The weeks that followed were filled with the joyous labor of planting. Anna took to the task with the same energy and care she gave to everything, and Charles found himself marveling at how much life she had brought to Whitmore Manor. Together, they transformed a quiet corner of the estate into a vibrant expanse of daisies, a living tribute to Eleanor's enduring spirit. On the day they finished, they stood together at the edge of the garden, admiring their work. The daisies swayed gently in the breeze, their white petals catching the sunlight. "It's beautiful," Anna said, her voice filled with awe. "It is," Charles agreed. "Just like the woman who inspired it." Anna reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. "I think she's happy now," she said softly, "because we're happy." Charles looked down at her, his heart full to overflowing. "I think you're right, Anna," he said. "She's happy, and so am I." As they stood there, the sun setting behind them, Charles felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with loss and uncertainty had brought him to a place of love and renewal. Whitmore Manor, once a symbol of solitude, was now a sanctuary of connection and hope. And as the daisies danced in the evening light, Charles knew that Eleanor's dream of a family had not only been realized, but surpassed. It was a legacy of love that would continue to bloom, season after season, in the hearts of those she had touched. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.